Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Appreciate the participants today on an important topic that we need to have vigilant oversight on, dealing with the TSA and the security gaps in a critical part of our culture. The 9/11 Commission concluded in their report, quote, "The most important failure was one of imagination. We do not believe leaders understood the gravity of the threat," end quote. That report underscored the need for government leaders to do a better job of preparing for security threats that can only now be imagined. It's no secret that people interested in harming America are coming up with creative ways to circumvent the existing security measures. The battle for aviation security is fought daily by the thousands of men and women who serve in the TSA's workforce. Every day, 2 million passengers in nearly 440 airports across the country depend on TSA to help hold the line and keep them safe. That's why passenger screening at checkpoints are so important. State-of-the-art screening technologies are not necessarily the magic bullet. There's also a human component and other methods and things that are used throughout the world that we should be paying attention to and implementing ourselves. But all aspects of passenger screening process, including luggage and carry-ons, must be working in concert. It is a vital part of what we do to protect this nation, and thus the hearing today. I'd like now to yield time to the former chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. He's the chairman of our subcommittee here, Mr. Micah of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and our ranking member and our witnesses today. Having been around since we formed TSA and one of the original authors of the legislation, we have 14 years behind us, and unfortunately we don't have much progress and success of the major purpose that we set out for, and that was to make certain that we are safe and secure and that we have a system that of particularly passenger and baggage screening that ensures that for the traveling American public. Now you heard what I just commented on. The GAO report from this week is just confirms that in just about every area of operations. We'll hear in a few minutes from the Inspector General. And on page 3 is a sort of a summary. He says, our most recent covert testing in September 2015. The failures included, this is TSA failures, included failures in the technology, failures in TSA procedures, and human error. We found layers of security simply missing. It would be misleading to minimize the rigor of our testing or to imply that our testing was not accurate reflection of the effectiveness of the totality of aviation security. That is very alarming. This report is very alarming. And where we've come, I went back from, again, 2007. Some information leaked. This was in the, just reporting it from USA Today, that screeners failed 75% of the time and finding dangerous materials and items that posed a threat 75% of the time with 30,000 screeners. We're now at 46,000 screeners, and most recently we've had this leak where the failure rate had been as high, and this is a report publicly obtained, of 95% failure. I think we need a complete overhaul. I think we need to address risk. I think we are hassling 99% of the people who pose no risk and still have no means of differentiating. We need to get TSA out of the screening business. They will never be able to recruit. They will never be able to train. They will never be able to retain. They will never be able to manage. But what they should be able to do is set the standards, and we have private screening under federal supervision for a host of other activities. Our highly secure nuclear facilities, our DOD facilities, and other facilities, and we let the private sector do what it does best, and we set the parameters, and then we audit, and we make the changes, because, again, I don't care what I hear today, I'm convinced that you cannot fix a system that will continue to fail. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The administrator, along with the thousands of people who serve in the TSA, need to own the system. And if problems arise, then you must be attended to swiftly and appropriately, but we also ask that they work in a proactive way so those threats are mitigated prior to getting to the airport and certainly prior to getting on an airplane. We look forward to the hearing testimony today. We'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings of Maryland, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's very important hearing. And let me welcome Mr. Roth, the Inspector General. It's good to have you here again on this very critical issue. Let me also welcome Ms. Grover from the Government Accountability Office, which does very important and excellent work for the committee on this and many other topics. I also want to welcome Administrator Neffinger. When I served as the subcommittee chairman on the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee, I admired Mr. Neffinger's technical expertise and the steady, determined leadership he brought to the Coast Guard's most significant challenges, including dealing with the horrible Deepwater Horizon oil spill. I am sure he remembers how it called the Coast Guard back again and again and again and again and again to ensure accountability, and every single time you were up to the task. And I am so glad that you have been chosen for this task. And I thank him for his decades of service, and I applaud President Obama's decision to appoint him to this very critical position. When it comes to the security of our airlines and our flying public, we must always push to stay ahead of the terrorists and anyone else who would do us harm. We must take nothing for granted. We must test ourselves constantly, and we must put the lessons we learn into urgent action. I've often said that so often we spend a lot of time talking about testing and how things are going to work when we have an emergency. And so often what happens, and we saw this to some degree, Mr. Neffinger, in Deepwater Horizon, we constantly say there will come a time when you'll see it works, when the rubber meets the road. And when that moment comes, so often we discover there is no road. Above all, we must never become complacent. We must treat every single day as if lives depend on the urgency of our actions, because they do. Unfortunately, until last spring, it appeared almost routine for senior leaders at the Transportation Security Administration to receive reports of security gaps in the nation's air passenger screening operations. These reports came from the Inspector General and GAO and specialized red teams at TSA itself. And they described additional rounds of testing revealing yet more gaps. The question today, I believe, is whether TSA and the Department of Homeland Security are responding with the urgency this situation demands. As the President often says, are they responding with the urgency of now? Based on their actions over the last several months, I believe that they are. However, their work is far from complete, and it is incumbent on both the agency and this committee to continue our oversight efforts in order to ensure that improvements are put into place. Last spring, Secretary Johnson ordered a comprehensive top-to-bottom review of all of TSA's practices and procedures to understand why the agency's performance was falling short of its own standards and our expectations here in Congress. He required senior leaders to report to him every 2 weeks about the root causes of these shortfalls, as well as the solutions being implemented to address them. Over the summer, TSA developed and began implementing a 10-point plan to revamp all aspects of its screening procedures, personnel training processes, and equipment maintenance practices. It is clear that the agency has been aggressively working to change its culture, and I'm very encouraged by the steps DHS and TSA have taken to date. However, we are early in the process. This agency has more than 42,000 employees responsible for ensuring security at about 450 airports. Making comprehensive changes in an agency of this size is not easy, and ensuring that these changes are effective and efficient in improving the agency's day-to-day performance requires a sustained, long-term effort. We must ensure that TSA establishes a new baseline with clear and specific metrics to measure performance. This committee must hold TSA's leadership accountable for the achievement of these new metrics. As I close, Administrator Neffinger, I think you know what I'm about to say. Just like at the Coast Guard Subcommittee, you should get used to seeing us on a regular basis. This committee's job is to oversee the implementation of TSA's transformation. We're going to be inviting you back again and again because the American people are depending on us to get it right. Finally, let me close by noting that the airlines and others also play a critical role in ensuring our security. We need to take a hard look at decisions by the airline industry that are making the TSA's job more difficult. For example, we have learned that the new fees airlines are charging to check bags are causing huge increases in the volume of carry-on luggage. Although this may result in significant new revenues for the airlines, it is also putting significant new strains on our screening operations, and I hope you will address that, Mr. Neffinger. I hope we will have an opportunity to discuss these issues in more detail today and at future hearings before the committee, and I just want to be clear, I have full confidence that we will get this right. We have no choice. With that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our panel of witnesses. First, we have Mr. Peter Neffinger, Administrator of the Transportation Security Administration at the United States Department of Homeland Security. We're also joined by the Honorable John Roth, United States Department of Homeland Security, and Ms. Jennifer Grover, Homeland Security and Justice at the United States Government Accountability Office. We welcome you all, and pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. If you will please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated and let the record reflect the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate it if you would limit your verbal testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be entered as part of the record. Mr. Neffinger, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on my vision for evolving the Transportation Security Administration. My leadership perspective is shaped by more than 3 decades of military service and crisis leadership. Fundamental to my approach are a well-defined statement of the mission, clear standards of performance, training and resourcing that enable the workforce to achieve success, appropriate measures of effectiveness, and an unwavering pursuit of excellence and accountability. I want to thank Inspector General Roth and Director Grover for the oversight that they have provided to TSA. I want to specifically thank Mr. Roth for his encouraging assessment of our new direction. That direction is a reflection of my vision on how we approach the continuing evolution of TSA. I'm now 4 months into the job, and I've traveled to dozens of airports and Federal Air Marshal offices across the country. I've also visited our European partners in the United Kingdom, France, and the Netherlands, and I've met with stakeholders from the airlines, travel industry, and airport operators. I've engaged surface stakeholders in passenger rail and light rail across the country and in Europe. I've been thoroughly impressed with the professionals who occupy our ranks, and I've been equally impressed with the collaboration across the transportation enterprise and the range of capabilities our Federal, state, and local partners bring to bear across every mode of our transportation system. These complex systems require that we examine them and consider them as a whole. We integrate the wide range of public and private capabilities to close gaps, reduce vulnerabilities, and counter threats, that we benchmark and apply best practices across the enterprise, and that we seek global consistency. However, as I have stated in previous hearings on this topic, my immediate priority has been to pursue solutions to the Inspector General's recent covert testing findings, which were unfortunately leaked to the media in May of this year. And we are making significant progress in doing so. The Inspector General's covert tests focused on an element of the aviation security system, specifically the advanced imaging technology capability within the checkpoint. His tests identified areas for improvement with which we concurred. The system as a whole remains effective, and as a result of these tests has only gotten stronger. In response, TSA implemented an immediate action plan to ensure accountability, improve alarm resolution, increase effectiveness, and strengthen procedures. We've also responded vigorously by implementing Secretary Johnson's 10-point plan, as previously referred to. And to ensure we don't repeat past failures, of utmost concern, from my perspective, was determining root causes of the problem. Our conclusion is that the screening effectiveness challenges were not merely an officer performance problem, nor were they a failure of the advanced imaging technology. The AIT has greatly enhanced our ability to detect non-metallic threats and continues to perform to expected standards when deployed and used properly. As we look at the people, processes, and technology, strong drivers of the problem include leadership focus, environmental influences, and gaps in system design and processes. There was significant pressure to quickly clear passengers at the risk of not completely resolving alarms. Our analysis also revealed that our officers did not fully understand the capabilities of the equipment, and several procedures were inadequate to resolve alarms. We have trained our officers to understand and use equipment properly, and we've corrected our procedures. Solutions require a renewed focus on security, revised procedures, investments in technology, realistic and standardized training, a new balance between effectiveness and efficiency, and support for our frontline officers. We will continue to partner with the airlines, airport operators, and the trade and travel industry to identify solutions that can reduce the stress on the checkpoint, and we must right-size and resource TSA appropriately. We've begun that process in earnest, and I can report that we have a principled approach in place designed to correct the immediate challenges while ensuring that this problem doesn't happen again. Our Mission Essentials training, conducted in August and September with every frontline officer and leader across TSA, has helped reset our focus on security effectiveness, and most critically, we have enhanced our officers' knowledge and understanding of the screening system. Longer term, our self-examination has given insight into how we must evolve. We face a critical turning point in TSA, both to address these recent findings and to begin our investment in a more strategic approach to securing the transportation sector. We need to measure security to drive an institutional focus, and what we measure is what our leaders and officers will pay attention to. Our approach needs to be adaptive and risk-based, constantly reassessing assumptions, plans, and processes, and we must be able to rapidly field new ways of operating. We must rethink how we invest in technology. Our adversaries remain intent on attacking the transportation sector, and our investment in new tools must exceed the speed of the enemy's ability to evolve. Most important, we must deliver an effective system and earn the confidence of the traveling public through competence, disciplined performance, and professionalism. I've conveyed these standards to our workforce, and I commit to you that we will continuously pursue these objectives. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, I want to assure you that TSA is an intelligence-driven counterterrorism organization, and I know that we are up to the challenges we face. We're on the front lines of a critical counterterrorism fight, and our workforce is willing and able to do the job. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Inspector General Roth, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings.
You could maybe just bring the microphone straight up to your, that would be great.
My apologies. Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me here to testify today. Throughout this year, I have testified before this committee and others regarding my concerns about TSA's ability to execute its important mission. I highlighted the challenges TSA faced. I that these challenges were in almost every area of TSA's operations. Its problematic implementation of risk assessment rules, including its management of the pre-check program, failures in passenger checkpoint and baggage screening operations, its control over access to secure areas, including management of its access badge program, its management of its workforce integrity program, its oversight of its acquisition and maintenance and screening equipment, and other issues we have discovered in the course of over 115 audit and inspection reports. We may be in a very different place now than we were in May when I last testified about this before this committee. I believe that Administrator Neffinger brings with him a new attitude about oversight. Ensuring transportation safety is a massive and complex problem, and there is no silver bullet to solve it. It will take a sustained and disciplined effort. However, the first step to fixing a problem is having the courage to critically assess the deficiencies in an honest and objective light. Creating a culture of change within TSA and giving the TSA workforce the ability to identify and address the risks will be the Administrator's most critical and challenging task. I believe that the Department and TSA leadership has begun the process of critical self-evaluation and, aided by the dedicated workforce of TSA, are in a position to begin addressing some of those issues. In September, we completed and distributed our report on our most recent round of covert testing. While I cannot talk about the specifics in this setting, I am able to say that we conducted the audit with sufficient rigor to satisfy our professional auditing standards, and that the tests were conducted by our auditors without any specialized knowledge or training, and the test results were disappointing and troubling. We ran multiple tests using different concealment methods at 8 different airports of different sizes, including large Category X airports across the country, and tested airports who were using private screeners. The results were consistent across every airport. Our testing was designed to test checkpoint operations in real-world conditions. The failures included technology, TSA procedures, and human errors. The Department's response to our most recent findings has been swift. For example, within 24 hours of receiving preliminary results of OIG testing, the Secretary summoned senior TSA leadership and directed that an immediate plan of action be created to correct deficiencies uncovered by our testing. TSA has put forward a plan consistent with our recommendations to improve checkpoint quality in 3 areas: technology, personnel, and procedures. This plan is appropriate because the checkpoint must be considered as a single system. The most effective technology is useless without the right personnel, and the personnel needed to be guided by the appropriate procedures. Unless all 3 elements are operating effectively, the checkpoint will not be effective. We will be monitoring TSA's efforts and will continue to conduct covert testing. Consistent with our obligations under the Inspector General Act, we will report our results to this committee as well as other committees of jurisdiction. I believe that this episode serves as an illustration of the value of the Office of Inspector General, particularly when coupled with a Department leadership that understands and appreciates objective and independent oversight. This review, like dozens of reviews before, was possible only because my office and my auditors had unfettered access to the information we needed. I believe I speak for the entire IG community in expressing my gratitude to this committee for the legislation currently pending in the House, H.R. 2395, the Inspector General Empowerment Act of 2015. This legislation would fix the misguided attempt by the Department of Justice to restrict access to records and would restore IG independence and empower the IGs to conduct the kind of rigorous, independent, and thorough oversight that the taxpayers expect and deserve. This legislation would also improve and streamline the way we do business. For example, my written testimony gives an example of the powerful results we can obtain from data matching, which the legislation would streamline. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I welcome any questions you or other members of the committee may have.
Thank you. And Director Grover, we're pleased to have you here with us today, and you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and other members and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss how TSA can improve the effectiveness of airport passenger screening. In the past 6 years, GAO has made 80 recommendations to TSA. TSA has concurred with nearly all of them and has taken action to address most of them. In fact, TSA has fully implemented more than 3/4. Yet every year, our reports continue to find vulnerabilities in the system, many related to questions of security effectiveness. Why is that? Our body of work over the past several years shows that TSA has consistently fallen short in basic program management in several aspects. 3 shortcomings stand out. First, failing to fully and rigorously evaluate the effectiveness of new technologies and programs. Second, not establishing performance measures that fully reflect program goals. And third, failing to use program data to identify areas for improvement. There are many GAO reports that illustrate the shortfalls in each area. I will provide one example for each. First, TSA should fully evaluate effectiveness prior to adoption to ensure that acquisitions and programs work and to make sure that monies are well spent. In one example, in our review of TSA's body scanning technology, known as AIT, we found that TSA evaluated these systems in the laboratory for effectiveness, but had not addressed how airport screeners were using the systems in the airport environment. If airport screeners don't carry out pat-downs properly to follow up on the potential threats that are signaled by the AIT, and we know that this is an ongoing challenge, then the effectiveness of the overall screening will be diminished. A related issue is that when TSA is designing studies of effectiveness, it's critical that they follow established study design practices to make sure that the results that they get at the end of the day are valid. TSA has struggled with this. In one example from 2013, we found that a DHS study of behavioral detection indicators did not demonstrate their effectiveness because of study limitations, including the use of unreliable data. My second point is that TSA should adopt performance measures that reflect program goals to make sure that the programs are operating as intended after they've been stood up. As an example, in 2014, we found that TSA did not have performance measures to determine the extent to which the Secure Flight program accurately identified passengers on the no-fly, selectee, and other watch lists, one of the program's key goals. My third point is that TSA should put systems in place to monitor the data it collects in order to identify areas for improvement. As an example, in 2013, we found that TSA officials collected data on the effectiveness of their canine program, but were only considering overall pass and fail rates. TSA was missing the opportunity to determine if there were specific search areas or types of explosives in which the canine teams were more or less effective, and to identify training needed to mitigate deficiencies. TSA is consistently responsive to GAO's recommendations, and TSA has addressed, at least to some degree, most of the examples I just mentioned. For example, TSA has modified its AIT testing to more fully evaluate effectiveness and has implemented new procedures to analyze canine testing data. In addition, TSA is in the process of testing its behavior detection activities and developing new secure flight performance measures. But addressing GAO's findings one by one will not solve the underlying problem of an organizational culture that has allowed programs to be stood up without sufficient evidence of their effectiveness. It is critical that TSA systematically address the cross-cutting program management weaknesses that I just described. Through well-designed evaluations of their programs and acquisitions, and continuing reliance on appropriate performance measures that allow them to monitor key program goals over time, TSA would be well-positioned to achieve long-standing improvements in aviation security effectiveness and other operations. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, this concludes my statement. I look forward to your questions.
We thank you. We'll now move to the question portion. We're going to start by recognizing the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Administrator, pleased to have you aboard. You come aboard when there's been unprecedented amount of criticism and findings of failure with your agency. So, and I know you're very intent. I had a chance to talk to you on trying to improve things and correct these things. But I think what, again, looking at this over 14 years and our objective is to keep the American people safe. In your statement, I guess, and statements we've had, you screened 660 million passengers last year, I guess it was. Yeah. And what percentage of those folks actually pose a risk? It's got to be less than 1%. Would you agree with that?
A very small percentage.
Yes, a very small percentage. But most of our resources are spent on building a bureaucracy. And there's over $2.3 billion on TSA bureaucracy to manage the 46,000 screeners that Congress has put a cap on. We've actually seen a failure rate disclosed publicly from 30,000 screeners to 46,000 screeners where things have gotten worse. You stated in your testimony there are a number of actions that have been completed, including the following: requiring screening leadership at each airport to oversight AIT operations and training and things of that sort. I'm telling you, even when you get this done, you have created a system that doesn't address the risk. Your chances of failure are almost 100% with the current system, even with the training that you employ. I can thwart the AIT machines. It took me 2 years to get TSA just to look at the AIT machines. You don't know the history of that, because I knew what we had in place. The puffers didn't work, and I knew the threat was there for explosives, and it's still there. But you all, and we've tried to put in different programs to make up for the layers that fail. Behavior detection, $1 billion we spent on behavior detection. We have thousands of officers. And here's a report here by the Freedom to Travel USA. It says, in the airports where it's used, 50,000 travelers have been flagged. 0 of these are terrorists. 16 known terrorists passed through the behavior detection airports on at least 24 occasions. My whole point here is that you need to get out of the personnel business, back into the security business, turning TSA back into doing the things that will save us, the intelligence gathering, setting the parameters for someone else. You're not a very good personnel agency, nor will you be. The recruitment's horrible, the training's horrible, the retention is horrible. It just goes on and on. So again, no matter what you do, if you don't address the risk and put our resources, we should be putting our resources. Every instance in which we've stopped them has been first the public, since 9/11, since that morning when they found out on Flight 93, they attacked those terrorists and took them down. Richard Reed, it was the crew and passengers that stopped him. In every instance, the liquid bombers, they woke me up in Texas and told me about that. That was British and Israeli intelligence. But it's got to be our intelligence that saves the day. Refocusing that, get you out of the personnel business, back into the security business, addressing that 1%. And what's scary, too, is the 1%, the no-fly list and the other list. We still don't have that right, according to some of the folks who have testified, some of the evidence that I've seen. So, again, I don't mean to give you a hard time, but I think please consider this. I sat, when we devised this system, with the head of, and I told you this story, of maximum security facilities. And when you go into those, you get body cavity searches. And they told me even with that, which you're not going to do to 659,000 or 659 million Americans, this still stuff gets through: counterband, drugs, weapons. So, again, I look forward to your response. You don't have to give it today, but I think if we change that out, get you out of the personnel business into the security business, that's the best use of our resources. Mr. Chairman, too, I'd like to put this report in the record, if I may. It's a Freedom to Travel USA TSA failures by the numbers. I think it's very enlightening if you would grant that request.
Without objection, so ordered. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair, and I thank the distinguished ranking member, my friend Mr. Cummings. Administrator Neffinger, welcome. And I really welcome your ascension to this office. My confidence in you was reinforced when I read your testimony about the determination of TSA on root causes, and you said the underlying screening effectiveness and technology challenges, you've said a disproportionate focus in the past has been on screening operations efficiency rather than security effectiveness, which is, after all, the mission. Would you expand on that?
Thank you, Congressman. As I mentioned in my opening statement and in my written statement, as we looked at root causes, and you really do have to look at root causes and try to determine, why it is that we saw the same failures repeatedly over time. So when you have an operating agency that observes the same things over and over, it tells me that you haven't really figured out what the problem was. And so you look at root causes, it goes beyond just whatever happened at the checkpoint that failed. You have to determine what is in your culture and in your organizational approach. If you recall, in the early days of TSA, there was a great concern about the wait times, and there was a great deal of pressure on TSA to get people through the screening checkpoints faster. And there's good reason for that. You don't want a lot of people packing up outside the sterile area. I think you have to be very careful, though, when you change, when you inject a concern like that to an organization, because what you measure is what you're going to get for performance. And so I really do believe that over time what happened was a great deal of effort to ensure wait times were kept to a minimum, people were pushed through the checkpoint. That puts pressure on the screeners to clear passengers versus resolving the alarms that they present. And so, and that slight nuance, a difference between clearing a passenger versus resolving something that the passenger presents, can change the effort you put into looking for that. And we found that.
I think it's really important, the point you're making, because it's very easy bureaucratically to check a box and say, well, what do you mean we've improved efficiency 600%? Yeah, but that isn't the goal. That's a means toward reaching the goal. And keeping one's eye on the mission, making the main thing is really important, and I thank you for doing that. Mr. Roth, or Ms. Grover, GAO has issued more than 25 TSA-specific reports in the last 5 years. The catalyst for this hearing was covert tests that your agency, Mr. Roth, conducted of passenger screening process. What did you find from that covert operation?
The specific results, of course, are classified, so I can't discuss them in this hearing, but what we found in a series of tests which took place across the country at different airports of different sizes using a variety of concealment methods by individuals who are auditors with no specialized training or skill is a universal disappointing performance by the TSA screening checkpoint. And again, what we look at is the entire screening checkpoint system. It's not just the AIT, it's not just the people, it's not just the procedures, but how they work together.
Would it be fair to say, without compromising security, that some significant breaches occurred?
Yes.
Very troubling. And Mr. Neffinger, presumably you're aware of those findings.
Yes, I am.
And has the agency taken corrective steps to try to address what Mr. Roth and his team discovered covertly?
Yes, sir, we have. One of the first things I did, actually, when this became public, it became public during my confirmation process between the first and second confirmation hearings. I had a chance to meet with Mr. Roth, and then I met with Mr. Roth again after swearing in as administrator, after being confirmed and swearing in. And one of the first things I wanted to do was understand the exact nature of the failures that occurred, how they were presented, and so that we could begin to address the root causes that, as you had mentioned earlier. We have put a tremendous amount of effort into not just determining the instant failures, but reaching back through the organization to figure out what systemically was going on that brought us to this. Because as you may also be aware, we have had other such discoveries of failures in the past.
Mr. Chairman, it may be useful at some point to have a classified briefing where we get fully briefed on that. One final question I'm going to sneak in my last 18 seconds. But Mr. Neffinger, one of the problems, and you've raised it too, that has occurred is, because it's now a lucrative business to charge for baggage, it's forced passengers to try to compensate by bringing in overhead luggage as much as possible. This affects your business and your mission. Could you just address that?
There's a lot more baggage coming through the checkpoint now than there used to be, and that baggage is much more packed with gear than it used to be. This is a challenge for anybody to screen it. I know that the airlines have been trying hard to enforce their 1+1 rule, but sometimes that enforcement doesn't take place until you get to the actual loading gate, and so multiple bags have come through the checkpoint. So we've been working very closely with the airline industry and with the airports to see what we can do to reduce some of that stress on the checkpoint. But it's just a fact of modern life that there's more stuff arriving at a checkpoint than used to arrive.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for being here. I wasn't here in Congress when TSA was instituted, and I don't have a lot of answers to how you do it. I just know that when I enter the airport in Detroit, I go through multiple contacts with multiple agents, including TSA. I would also hasten to say at a meeting like this, while there are concerns and there are problems we have to deal with, overwhelmingly I've been treated well by TSA, even when they didn't know I was a member of Congress. And the fact of the matter is that only 2 incidences can I remember the exact airport where I was not treated well, Los Angeles and Dulles. That says, for the most part, your personnel doing a job I wouldn't want to do are at least attempting to work with, and I want to applaud you for that. We can jump on you, but I think there is also something to say about having a untenable job to do, where you have to be right all the time. And fortunately, since 9/11, as a result of TSA's efforts and others' efforts, including the airlines and passengers, we have not had a down plane. And we want that to continue. But I do want to ask you some questions, Mr. Neffinger. In our hearing today, you pledged to fix some things. During other public crises, other TSA administrators have pledged to fix things. What will be different this time?
Thank you for that question. It really goes to what I was saying earlier, and that is, when you have, so my experience is I've been an operator my whole career. I spent 34 years in the United States Coast Guard. In many respects, a lot of similarities between the Coast Guard and the TSA in this sense. Both are mission-based organizations. Both have, in some respects, missions that have a no-fail quality to them. Both have a distributed frontline workforce that's responsible for carrying out that mission. So in my experience, what makes operating agencies challenging and exciting at the same time is challenging in that you have something you have to do every single day. And that tyranny of the right now can lead you to simply address the problem in its presentation. By that I mean, you have a failure at a checkpoint, you work with the team at that checkpoint, you work with the team at that airport, and you say, look, you failed, here's how you failed, don't do it again. That may seem like it fixes the problem, but it really doesn't over time. What you find is that typically if you have failures like that in a dedicated frontline workforce, and I really appreciate the words you had to say about that workforce, then it means you've got something more systemic going on. And it's hard sometimes for an operating agency to take the time to do that.
How will you monitor that bigger picture then?
Well, I think that it starts by recognizing that there is a bigger picture and saying it out loud. And so that's something I said when I first came in. Anytime you have multiple failures that look the same over time, that means something else is going on. And so we're going to stop. We're going to look at the entire approach to the organization. How well do we understand our mission? How well have we articulated that mission in terms of what it needs to succeed? How well have we deployed the equipment that we think addresses that need? How well have we trained our people to work that equipment? And what kinds of processes have we given them and procedures? For example, we found that there were 3,100 independent tasks that we expected a screener to memorize. That's an impossible task. You can't do that. So it gets additive over time. So you've got to step back to first principles and say, this is about the mission first and foremost. It's about the performance of that mission in an environment in which we have so much at stake. It pays. You have to look at what's already been done by third-party independent auditors. I greatly value the work of the GAO and the IG's offices because they give me a third-party independent assessment of what are some of those challenges. And I can use that as a way to go back and begin to dig into the deeper issues in the organization.
Let me add on to what my friend Mr. Connolly started with you. And I think it goes to this idea of a bigger picture. How will you work with airports, airlines, and others to disrupt the incentives that can emphasize speed over security?
Well, as I mentioned, I've met with a number of those, actually all of the major airlines in the U.S., as well as their associations and other stakeholders. It starts by recognizing that this is an interactive system. TSA doesn't work alone inside the aviation system. It works in conjunction with all the other players, and everyone has a role to play in the security of the system. And so it's not simply a handoff and a transaction from one entity in the system to the other. It's a continuous interaction, and that interaction requires that they be aware of the challenges that their system imposes upon our responsibilities for security, just as we have to be aware of the challenges that our security responsibilities impose on them. I will tell you that they've been very receptive to that. There's a lot more work we can do to connect more effectively to the various players in the system. And so I've established a number of regular meetings now with my counterparts in the private sector, as well as across the system, to begin to address what I think are these longstanding, overarching issues that have been not necessarily ignored, but have not been attended to appropriately.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the Ranking Member, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Director Grover, when you were talking about the problems, I wrote 2 words, and I wrote the words culture gap. In other words, I think from just listening to you, a culture has been established. And I think that culture is in part, and I want you all to comment on this. I'm just listening and reading. You know, the chairman will tell you that when we've been dealing with the Coast Guard, not the Coast Guard, but the Secret Service, one of the things that we worried about was a culture of complacency. Not that people are not good people, but you get used to nobody jumping over the fence at the White House. So because everything's going to be all right. And so what happens is that people get sort of lulled, and it's slow, but it's a culture, and it's going to be all right. And then, Administrator, when you combine that with this thing about making sure you get the people through quickly, and you put the quickness over, the mission, then I think you have a combination for problems. And I think those kind of problems are very difficult to address. And I'm trying to figure out, first of all, would you comment on that, Ms. Grover?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. So TSA was originally stood up in a culture of crisis where they had to be responsive, and they had to be responsive fast. But at this point, it is time to transition to a culture of accountability for effectiveness. TSA definitely is aware of the importance of ensuring their programs are effective. And I appreciate Administrator Neffinger's remarks about enhancing that culture throughout the workforce. But at the end of the day, for GAO, it comes down to a very simple question, which is, does the program work, and how do you know? And no matter how much the staff are educated in the current failures or retrained, no matter how much there is an emphasis on new SOPs, at the end of the day, there has to be measurement, like the Administrator said, and they have to have a systematic process to follow through to make a culture of accountability for effectiveness.
You don't know what you just said. I think you just hit the nail quite well. So they started with a culture of emergency. And so everybody's, we got to make sure that we protect ourselves. And then when the emergency seems to wane, you can slowly move into what I talked about, the culture of complacency. But now we got to change our whole dynamic and create a new normal. And that is a new normal of accountability. Now, you got a plan, right? You have a plan?
Yes, sir, I do.
And you plan to implement it by March of 2016? Is that right?
Well, there are a number of steps in that, but
That's what I was going to ask you. What will the status of the screening process be at that date? Will it have reached what you envision as peak effectiveness, or will it still be in the process or improving mode?
Well, so in answer to that question, let me say I think that you have to always be in the continuous improvement mode. I think you hit it on the head. Otherwise, you do go complacent. The day you think you get the screening process or security process right is the day you'll be defeated, and I believe that entirely. So this is continuous focus on the mission, continuous focus and continuous evaluation through key measures of your performance of that mission. Now, that said, what have we done to address these immediate challenges? Retrain the entire frontline workforce, and I know that sounds easy to say, but let me explain what that means. We called it Mission Essentials Threat Mitigation, and we called it, I wanted it called Mission Essentials for a reason. It's about reminding people that we have a mission first and foremost, and it is truly a no-fail mission in the aviation system. And to remind them and to reactivate that desire in them that they exhibited when they raised their hand and said, I swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
And how do you do that? How do you do that, what you just said?
I think what first you say it out loud.
Right.
It starts by at the very top of the organization saying, what you do is critically important, and I'm going to make sure that everything I do is designed to make sure you succeed at your mission, to focus first and foremost. So I start at the mission every day, and I work backwards. That means I start with the junior-most person in this organization that's standing on a screening line, and I think about what it means for that individual to do their job effectively, and what do I need to do, and what does everybody between me and that individual need to be focused on to make that happen. This isn't about me as an individual. It's not about making myself look good or anybody between me and that person. It's about every one of us remembering that we serve a higher order here, and we engage in a higher order. That is surprisingly important for a frontline workforce to hear. I learned that in my years in the Coast Guard. It may seem simple, but that's the most powerful thing you can tell somebody is what you do is important, and it's so important that I'm going to spend every waking moment paying attention to getting that done right.
One last comment, Mr. Chairman. I hope that you took note of what Director Grover said, and I hope that in your discussions with your staff that you remind them about this, what she said. One time as a culture that was about an emergency. Now it's about accountability, because I think that makes a lot of sense. And,
yes, sir.
Hopefully we'll get another chance to ask a few questions. Thank you.
I think the gentleman now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Neffinger, we're all, I guess, kind of creatures of our own personal experience, but I'll tell you, having most of us travel on a regular basis, and the airports that I use, which are primarily Greenville, Spartanburg, and South Carolina, Charlotte, and TCA, I have never had anything other t+than professional encounters with TSA folks, ever. There's not a single instance where I can think of where it wasn't A+ in terms of professionalism. So, you know, we're only creatures of our own, and I don't wear a member pin. So don't anybody think it's because they figured out what I do for a living. They didn't, and I don't, thank the Lord, look like most of my colleagues. So I don't think that it was for that reason. I think it's tough being in law enforcement, period. I think, quite frankly, without digressing into a broader conversation about that, I think it's become even tougher in the last couple of years to be in law enforcement. So what I want you to tell me is, where are your applicants coming from? What is the source of the poor morale, other than that you only make the news when something goes wrong? If there's a TSA agent who is involved in stealing, or if there's a TSA agent that does something wrong, that's when you make the news. But you don't ever make the news for just simple professionalism. So what's the source of the morale issues? Where do you draw your applicants from? And what is your plan on bolstering morale?
Well, thanks for your question, Mr. Gowdy, and thank you for your good words about our workforce. I will echo the fact that I think the majority of the TSA workforce, particularly the screening workforce, are truly dedicated, responsible, and patriotic Americans. These are people who, as somebody's already mentioned, have took an oath to do a job that many people in this country would not want to do, and very few people would choose to do. That said, so what's the source of morale? Again, my experience, it's a well-defined mission statement and a clear mission of importance. I think we have a clear mission of importance. I don't know that we've always clearly defined that to our workforce. So it's reconnecting the workforce to the desire that they had in the first place to join, to become part of something that's important, that means something, and that means something to our nation. That's first and foremost. That's what the military is all about, and that's what my experience there tells me. Then it's having clear and unequivocal standards of performance. And what I mean by that is what causes high morale is if people know that they're held to a high standard of performance and that people who don't meet those standards aren't going to be part of your workforce anymore. So I think you have to be consistent across the organization. Then you have to train them appropriately. You have to actually train them in not just how to do their job, but how to engage the system, how the system works. I think we need to do some work on that score. One of the things that we discovered in the course of the root cause analysis after the covert testing failures was that we actually had not explained to the majority of the frontline workforce what the technology capabilities were. So what can the machines do, what can't they do? No one ever did that to me when I was in the military. They never handed me a piece of equipment and said, just go figure out how it works. So when you connect them to their system, and we never asked their opinion on what they thought of the challenges of working that checkpoint. You need feedback from your frontline workforce. This isn't just a one-way transmission. You've got to engage them. So I think the components of morale are important, clear and important mission, support for that mission, training to accomplish the mission, understanding of the equipment that we give you to do that, and then engaging you and getting some feedback from you and letting you be part of the solution that goes forward. There's nobody who knows that mission better than the people who are conducting it every day. So those are the things that we're putting into place. It takes some time to see the results of that, but I see lots of opportunity on those points to really re-engage the workforce in a much more effective way and to actually activate, as I said, that which brought them to the job in the first place. With respect to recruiting, we currently use a third-party contractor to help screen recruits, but we recruit from all over the country, and we recruit from all walks of life. The astonishing thing is the talent that exists within the workforce. I have people with PhDs who are frontline screeners who've retired and come back into the workforce. I have people with music degrees. I have people from all walks of life. So there's as you might expect in a workforce of 44,000 screeners, you have a broad range of people at all ages.
One last question, because my time's almost up. If we were to interview 100 folks who had left, not for cause, but just left, what would be the dominant reason they cited for why either their expectations weren't met or they lost interest? Why do folks leave?
Well, I'll give you some thoughts I have, because I haven't done those interviews myself. I think it's probably a combination of factors. You always have some people who just decide that it's not the job for them and they move on. But let's address some of those concerns that you have with morale. I think it's not feeling like you're doing the mission that you thought you were going to be hired to do. So I think if I'm a screener and I think it's about effectiveness and screening properly, and I'm being told to move people through the line more effectively, that's probably going to cause me to say, I'm not sure that this organization cares about the things that they said they did. Did I get the proper training? Do I feel like I'm being supported? Do I feel like I have advancement opportunities? And do I get continuous development over the course of my career? I think all of those are the things that go in deciding whether or not you're with an employer you'd like to stay with or you want to move on and look for some other opportunity.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member. Thank you to our panelists, Mr. Nefflinger and Inspector General Roth, Ms. Grove's testimony, both for the strengths and failures. Just following up on Mr. Gowdy's question, Mr. Nefflinger, have you ever thought about offering a bonus or a bounty for a screener that actually gets somebody with a gun coming through the checkpoint or with some malicious intent?
We've actually looked at all sorts of new potential incentive programs. I'm a big fan of incentivizing the right behavior.
Okay. I don't want you to have to go into that because I got some other questions. This is such a target-rich environment. We have so many problems. I actually reviewed I went to the classified briefing, and while Inspector General Roth has used the word, disappointing and troubling. I would use pathetic in looking at the number of times people got through with guns or bombs. These covert testing exercises. It really was pathetic. And when I say that, I mean pitiful. The number of times people got through. I mean, I fly a lot. My family flies a lot, and just thinking about the breaches there, it's horrific. So one of the things we can do is just be honest about the degree of the breaches and the scope of it. And I think you've got at that. I think you've really looked at the cultural problems here and what we got to get at, and I appreciate that. So I'm supporting you. I'm not just criticizing you. I'm supporting you in your changes. But the nature of the threat has evolved as well. So now you have ISIS asking for lone wolf attacks, which probably presents a greater vulnerability to passenger rail security than it does to airlines, perhaps. But I'm just wondering about what we're doing to evolve with that threat. And the other big gap that I see is in terms of people with credentials in airports, in secure areas, and we're having major gaps there. We're letting people in that have connections with terrorism. There's indicia of connections with terrorism, and they're getting through our screening process and getting into secure areas of the airport and being awarded credentials. I think we had 73 instances of that. Are we redoing this? And also, I'd like Inspector General Roth also to speak to that issue, because I know you've been relentless and you've been very good about this. In the past, there's been denial. I don't think we're hearing that from you, Mr. Neffinger. I don't think we are at all. But in the past, there's been a culture of denial, and we need to get at this. So we're going to have a major, major disaster here on a commercial airline or on a train, and we're not going to be able to. Well, people will say we didn't see that coming, but we did. We did. We have. We see it now, and I'm just wondering what our response is going to be to address that issue.
Let me see if I can address a couple of the points you made there with respect to what we're doing. Let me start with the last point first on the insider threat concern, people with badges in airports. As you know, there's been some concern about the security of the badged population. This is a trusted population, or should be a trusted population. So how do you determine whether your trusted population is truly to be trusted? So what safeguards do you put in place? I think there's work to be done there, and I'm encouraged by Secretary Johnson's reach to, earlier this year, prior to my confirmation, he had asked the Aviation Security Advisory Committee, which is a standing statutory committee of industry members that advise the Department and the Administrator. They took a hard look at this problem, and they came up with 28 recommendations, with which TSA fully concurred, and in the process of looking for an implementation plan for that. That said, what did they say was a challenge? First of all, it's having real-time access to the appropriate databases to screen people. TSA does, in fact, recurrently vet against the terrorist databases. One important point to note with respect
we've got gaps in that. And you're taking an awful lot of time to give me very little answer.
Okay.
But
so with the 73 members, it's actually 69 discrete individuals. They were not actually on the any terrorist watch list, but they had incomplete indicia in what's called the Terrorist Information Data Mart environment. But that information wasn't sufficient to raise to known or suspected terrorist status. I'm not just mincing words. It's just clear that they were not of sufficient. And remember, we don't make those determinations. That's an FBI determination. With respect to ensuring that we pay attention to the evolving threat, I am directly connected to my counterparts across the intelligence community. I get a daily intelligence briefing that's a synthesis of what everyone is seeing. I'm very concerned about how complex and dynamic the threat environment is. I think in some respects it's the most complex we've seen since 9/11. And what makes groups like ISIL particularly concerning is that they are intending to inspire, and the intent to operation phase is compressing.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask the Inspector General if he would just give his version of that? I didn't hear a lot there, but you know, I still think we've got a problem, and I'm still worried about it, and I'm not hearing you know, decisive action being taken in that regard.
We're well over time, but if the Inspector General care to comment, then we'll.
Just briefly, and thank you for the
Please,
question.
yeah, thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that.
This goes to sort of what I call beyond the checkpoint. Certainly our focus has been on the checkpoint, but there's a lot of security risk that is out there that is beyond the checkpoint. Aviation worker vetting is one of them. For example, we did an audit of TSA's job as a regulator. In other words, the airports have the duty to manage the CITA badges, the restricted access badges, and adjudicate criminal histories of those aviation workers. And yet what we found in a recent audit, for example, is that as a regulator, TSA only examines perhaps 1% of all the adjudications that the airports do. So anytime you have an issue where the airports have part of the responsibility and TSA has part of the responsibility, if you have those seams in there, that's what worries me. So the fact that you have those seams, as well as how TSA is doing as a regulator, and I think we're going to be paying more attention to that as time goes on.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again.
Thank you. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Administrator, quick answers if we could. If you try to bring a gun through a checkpoint and you get caught, what happens to that person?
Depends on the state that you're in and the airport that you are, but it's turned over to local law enforcement.
But do they go on a database that you administer? Do you note that person in your database?
We do note that individual's name, yes.
Do they go on a no-fly list?
They do not necessarily go on a no-fly list. It depends upon the nature of how they presented. The no-fly list, as you know, is a terrorist watch list,
right?
And it's managed primarily by the FBI. So the no-fly list is you specifically put on based upon your connection as a known or suspected terrorist. So
trying to bring a gun onto an airplane is not put you into a category as potentially a nefarious terrorist type of person, correct?
It will ensure that you get increased scrutiny when you travel, and you'll lose, if you're a pre-check member or an expedited screening member, you'll lose that.
For how long?
For a minimum of 90 days. It depends upon the nature of the incident.
So you try to bring a gun on a plane, whether it's an accident or not, and just for 90 days you just don't get pre-check. That's the penalty?
You'll get significant additional screening, which will include.
But you can go day 91, you get back into pre-screen. I saw somebody who is pretty well known in Utah. They were found to have a gun. Said it was an accident. I'm sure it was, but I also saw that person back in pre-check pretty quick, and life goes on. But if you're on the no-fly list, does that mean you can't fly?
Unless they're given a specific waiver request that comes from the FBI, yes, sir, that's correct.
So if you're on the no-fly, how many people on the no-fly list?
I'd have to get you that number. I don't know off the top of my head.
What percentage of the TSA's time is spent on aviation, and where are the other areas in which you're allocating resources?
The vast majority of our effort is spent on the aviation security system because it's the federal responsibility. So if you're just looking at allocation of resources, you've got a large personnel component of that, which takes a great deal of that. So it's over 90% of our resources are on the aviation system.
What other things is the TSA spending their time on?
We have a responsibility across all surface modes of transportation, so passenger and light rail, over-the-road motor carriers and buses, pipelines, and maritime. But maritime we do in conjunction with the U.S. Coast Guard.
Tell me a little bit more, if you could. I want to go to the Director Grover. There are some things that have been on this list that you've been concerned about for year after year after year. And I really did like, as Mr. Cummings did, how do you solve that cultural problem? But is anybody have any consequence if they fail in this mission? I mean, are they holding people accountable?
We have a study underway on that issue right now. There are annual exams that the screeners have to pass in order to keep their jobs. Beyond that, there are requirements for retraining if there are errors.
What about, and maybe the Inspector General, the Director can ask, the behavioral profiling part of this, the SPOT part of the program. Can you comment on this real quick on how well that's being implemented?
Sure. Well, this is about $200 million a year, and it is for behavioral detection activities, and the premise is that the officers will be able to spot individuals who pose a threat to aviation security. TSA doesn't have evidence that is sufficient for GAO. So we don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
Inspector General, have you looked at this at all?
We looked at this in May of 2013. What we found is that there were no metrics that TSA had provided as far as what success looks like in the program. They had very poor data collection. They had insufficient training of the BDOs. I mean, keep in mind what the whole idea behind this is that you're going to be able to take this population and figure out who it is that's the greatest risk.
Now, are they putting too many, sorry, I'm jumping because my time's run out. Sure. Are they putting too many people into the TSA pre-lines?
That was our concern, and based on several sort of audits that we did in the spring of this year, we believe that the administrator has taken fairly significant and drastic action to reduce the number of individuals in the pre-check who had not been individually vetted. We made a number of recommendations. The prior administrator had rejected those recommendations, but since Administrator Neffinger has come in, there has been a change as to whether or not those recommendations are adopted.
And this is, again, my concern here is that behavioral profiling is an important part of what we're doing, but how to train and implement that is a critical component. I'm also a big fan of the K-9 teams. They're mobile. There's a perception that they are able to detect things that I think would make somebody very nervous. The presence of a K-9 in conjunction with behavioral profiling, going through a metal detector, would be much more effective and efficient. It's certainly what the military came to the conclusion of doing, and I think we need to pay keen attention to that. But my time has expired. We'll now recognize Ms. Kelly for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Screening lanes designated as pre-check lanes are available at more than 150 airports, according to TSA's website. Travelers who go through such lanes receive expedited screening. There are several ways that travelers can assess the pre-check lanes. Under one procedure, individuals apply to the program, pay a fee, provide data on themselves, and undergo background checks. If an applicant is determined to be a low-risk flyer, the applicant is enrolled in the pre-check program. However, TSA has been directing some travelers to the expedited pre-check lines, even if they did not enroll in the program. Specifically, travelers can be directed to the pre-check lanes through procedures that have been called Managed Inclusion 1 and Managed Inclusion 2. Administrator Neffinger, in your testimony, you wrote that at your discretion, TSA has phased out the practice known as Managed Inclusion 2. Can you discuss what this program was and why it has ended, and what has been the impact of the elimination of this program on passenger volume and expedited screening lines?
Yes, so the Managed Inclusion 2 program that you referred to was a term given to the practice of randomly assigning people that were in a standard screening lane to the expedited screening lane. And it was simply done with a random generator. You would get a yes/no, and they would move people in. That was pushing at its peak about 14% of average daily travelers through expedited screening lanes, and these are people who had not been through the pre-check, through any kind of a pre-check vetting. There were some things that were done that were intended to buy down the risk of those individuals, some additional randomized measures that were taken after you got pushed into that lane. It was my opinion when I took over that was an untenable risk. And so I discontinued that practice, and as of September 12th, it was eliminated completely. We had to ramp it down slowly so we didn't shock the system, but we eliminated that completely.
How long did that go on?
How long did that process go on? I think it was about 1.5 years or so that was run. There's another form of moving of people into expedited screening lanes, a much smaller number. You referred to it as Managed Inclusion 1, but what it really is the use of passenger sniffing canines to randomly assign some people from standard screening into the expedited screening lanes, but using the canines, and then additional screening measures that apply to each of them. That's a very small percentage of the daily travelers, and I'll get you the exact number on that. But I'm a big fan and a big proponent of a fully vetted population in an expedited screening lane. I think the only way we can, going back to the earlier comments about risk-based security, I really want to know as much as I can about an individual traveling as they come through, given that the vast majority of people are safe to do so. So the goal is to significantly expand the truly vetted pre-check population over the coming months and to completely eliminate the random assignment of anyone into the pre-check lane that has not already been vetted for such.
Maybe I missed this, but do you feel that more people are going through the pre-check program, so they can go through the faster lines? Because it seems like the last couple of times I've traveled, there are many more people on the pre-check line, and I'm O'Hare, so.
Well, we're seeing a huge spike in enrollments over the past couple of months. So we're averaging about 50,000 enrollments a month right now, which is encouraging to me. And that's before the response that to our recent request for proposals to expand the marketing opportunities to up to 3 additional private sector vendors to look for more retail opportunities to enroll in pre-check. I know that I've worked with talked with the airlines and the travel industry. They're advertising it. If you've flown recently, you may have seen on the in-flight screens advertisements for pre-check. So the industry is working very hard to increase enrollments as well.
Okay, thank you. Inspector General Roth, you wrote that you were pleased to report that we have recently made significant progress in getting concurrence and compliance with recommendations the Inspector General's office has made regarding pre-check, but that TSA is continuing to use some risk assessment tools you have recommended that they discontinue. To that extent, can you, in this open setting, to recommendations your office has made to the TSA regarding access to expedited screening processes that TSA has not acted on at this point?
Certainly, and thank you for that question. Just as an overlay, we had a number of open recommendations or recommendations that TSA did not agree with, and those are set forth, I think, starting on about page 20 of the appendix to my testimony. And one of the things that I wanted to do was highlight in bold those that have changed in the last 6 months, and it is significant. There's almost no disagreement now between TSA and the Office of Inspector General as to what needs to be done. There is a fairly narrow point, and unfortunately, because this is an open setting, it's not possible to discuss it, but there is a certain risk profile of a certain type of passenger that we believe should not be an expedited screening. But we are in discussions with TSA about it. These are good faith discussions as to what is an appropriate level of risk, and I'm highly confident we're going to get to a place that both protects the American people but also moves passengers in an expedited way.
I think.
Oh, okay, my time's up. I have one more. And the TSA, am I past my time? Oh, I'm sorry. I yield back.
Thank you. We now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank each of you for your testimony. It's Inspector General Roth, I'm glad to hear that you say that a lot of the disagreement has disappeared, because previously that was a major concern as we have GAO and the IG making recommendations, and yet TSA somehow believes that they have their Karnak hat on and they're able to figure out what to anticipate and what not to anticipate. So I would encourage that continued I guess, partnership. But speaking of partnerships, I want to focus on the partnership for public service, and specifically with regards, Administrator, to low employee morale. We have held hearings in this very room about some of the worst places to work, which perhaps that title was not the best title to pick. But we've also found that there is a tremendous opportunity in terms of employee morale on how to encourage the workforce. Your survey has consistently, well, let's just say that it's not something that you would try to attain. do I have your commitment today to reach out to some of those agencies that get good marks on that survey to find out the best practices that they have? NASA in particular continues to get high marks. Do I have your commitment to do that?
Yes, sir, and so does the workforce.
Okay. Let me go a little bit, Director Grover, let me come to you, because I'd like you, if you could briefly summarize some of your concerns as it relates to the AIT machines and the procurement thereof and some of the challenges that we've had there.
That's a really important issue because it is one of the main technologies that TSA relies on for screening passengers. What we originally found was that TSA had considered the effectiveness of the technology in the laboratory, but hadn't considered the broader picture of the employees who use them in the airport environment. And they have taken steps to address that in the procurement of the next version of the AIT systems. They have begun measuring the effectiveness of the entire system and looking at the detection rate of the entire system working together, and that's really important. One recommendation that we still have open is that TSA should pay close attention to its understanding of the false alarm rate on those machines. It is significant, and it has repercussions for both security effectiveness, because if screeners are used to a high false alarm rate, then they begin to think that there may not be anything there when the alarm goes off. And it also has repercussions for financing, because every time the machine alarms, the person has to go through a pat-down. So if the false alarm rate could be reduced, then it would have financial implications as well. And that is something that TSA is working on, but they do not yet have system-wide understanding of the operational false alarm rates.
And so, Administrator, I see you shaking your head. You're willing to work with GAO on that and make sure that we come up with a matrix on how to, here's one of the concerns I have. We all talk about how we're going to work on it, and yet we don't really put parameters in there to judge whether we're successful or not. So will you work on a matrix that satisfies GAO as it relates to false alarms?
Not only that, but we've been working very hard to completely restructure the process we use for doing this. I think that Director Grover has raised some important points, and they're key to, they are the key challenges that we face, but you can't do it unless you change the way you do business. And so it's really given us an opportunity, it's given me an opportunity to completely restructure the way we do business.
All right, let me, when we talk about restructuring the way that we do business, one of the things that happens a lot is administrators come here and say, we just need more money. And I think that in a bipartisan fashion, we're willing to give you the resources necessary to do it if you're willing to look at not only the recommendations that the IGA and GAO have looked at, but look at recreating the way that you do business from a security standpoint. The chairman mentioned K-9 units. A plan or to look at K-9s to bring them in during those high times of travel. Not 1 a.m. in the morning, when you have 2 TSA, personnel there. But during those, to help alleviate some of the backlog, are you willing to come up with a proposal and submit to this committee on how you might implement that?
I will. In fact, I think I have a good story to tell this committee with respect to K-9s. One of the first things I did was look at the current disposition of K-9 units across K-9 teams across the nation. I'm repositioning a number of those from small, lesser traveled airports to the large, high-volume airports. We're bringing a number of new teams on board this year. I will get you a full report for the committee because I think it's a good report, and it shows that we're moving, I believe, in the right direction with respect to thinking of the system. And I just want to make one comment with respect to your comments. I absolutely agree with you that you have to take a systemic view of this. If you look at discrete elements of the system, all you'll do is look at discrete elements of the system, and you won't think about how they interact with one another. So it's looking at the entire environment that we call aviation security and understanding how all of these components interact with one another and how effective they are. It speaks to everything from false alarm rates to the proper use of K-9s to other things. And I'm happy to provide a much fuller brief at the committee's discretion on how we're doing that.
I yield back. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is an important hearing. Before I ask my question, Administrator Neffinger, this is a copy of a District of Columbia license. We've had to have the administrator in and then the deputy administrator in because it changed from saying Washington, D.C. to saying District of Columbia. And apparently this really befuddled the screeners, and so some have been asked for their passport because this license, the license of the place where you are now wasn't recognized. So I want to provide you with a copy of this before you leave so that kind of periodic reminders can be made. This was a change. I understand it was changed from Washington, D.C., and there was an attempt by the administrator and the deputy administrator to work closely with me. Since you're new, I want to make sure that this doesn't have to come up on your watch. Mr. Neffinger, I have sat, for example, and seen what we have experienced at the airport, mentioned with respect to screeners who try to get, who sit, for example, at the Capitol or at federal buildings. I must say, I think this needs a study by psychologists, people who know something about the human mind and how it operates, because all you have to do is ask for a GAO study. You will always get that they, in fact, don't catch bombs, don't catch pistols. We need to learn more instead of just trying to catch people, because we are getting the same results no matter where they are, whether they're magnetometers or whether they are TSA. For example, for TSA, we have had people to bring bombs and shoes to try to detonate their shoes. We've had a so-called underwear bomber. And it's interesting to note that with respect to those items, that they went through multiple layers of security, and it was passengers, not TSA, who in fact were called on to put down those very dangerous people. This leads me to ask whether or not TSA is really equipped, for example, to discover these. We've had this matter before the Congress, these plastic handguns. I mean, if they can't find ordinary items like bombs and pistols, and they are, as you can see, very inventive, what I'm wondering is does TSA have access to the intelligence to meet their adaptiveness in light of emerging threats? They're not going to do the same thing that passengers took them down for before. Do you have access to that intelligence, or do you have to depend upon some other agency? And if so, how do they relay to you what the emerging intelligence reveals?
Well, thank you for that question. And first, just to be clear, the underwear bomber and the Richard Reed shoe bomber, those were not screened by TSA because they came from overseas in.
Yeah, I understand that.
So those, and it's one of the reasons that we became concerned about the non-metallic threat. I do have access to intelligence, and as I noted earlier, every morning I get an intelligence briefing, and it's a compilation of intelligence from across the intelligence community. I meet regularly with other members of the community, and we have people embedded in all of the major intelligence components. So the National Counterterrorism Center, the National Targeting Center, the CIA, NSA.
Do you screen yourselves instead of waiting for an outside agency to do it?
We do. Well, we do the recurrent vetting of the trusted populations, as well as recurrent vetting of people in the secure flight that enter into secure flight, that put a passenger reservation in, and then continuous recurrent vetting of individuals who are in the trusted traveler programs.
You know, I understand that your screeners often pass their own tests when you do your own internal vetting, and that is why I asked this question about trying to understand, particularly people who have to stand in one place for several hours doing the same thing, seeing the same thing. Don't we need to know more about how the human brain operates with respect to that kind of work so that we can better equip screeners to do this, frankly, very boring job?
I think that's a key point, and one of the things that we looked at as we looked at what are the repeated causes of these things that we keep seeing over and over
So
again.
who is looking at that then?
Well, we initially looked at it through an assigned team. It was a secretary referred to it as the Tiger team, but I've inherited as really the team that was the root cause analysis team. And the next thing you have to do then is say, okay, now that I find these root causes, can we correct them ourselves, or do we need help in doing so?
I'm just going to ask you finally, I know my time is out, if you would consider getting an outside study from people equipped to understand the human brain and how it operates after repetitiveness and of this kind, so that we can get a hold of this.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at human factors. You're absolutely right, so I would consider.
Thank you.
Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here today. We appreciate your presence. Mr. Roth, I understand.
Through the checkpoint. So that would be either the AIT machine, the Advanced Imaging Technology machine, or, for example, if they were part of managed inclusion through no sort of action on their own, but was simply, sent to a magnetometer, going through that way as well. So they just acted like normal passengers, except they had things concealed on them.
So this particular operation did not really look at where the employees are going or anything outside. It was just typical passengers.
Correct. We did some covert testing 2 years ago on that very issue, that is trying to get into the very secure areas, sort of unguarded access to aircraft or checked baggage and that kind of a thing. And the results were disappointing.
You mentioned the imaging machines, and were there actually guns or simulated bombs that you were able to get through? Did they go through the imaging machine as well?
I can't talk about the specifics, unfortunately, but we did test the imaging machine, and we did test it with significant numbers of prohibited items, and again, the results were disappointing.
And as well as the X-ray machines?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Roth, earlier this year, you testified before the Senate Committee on Homeland Security, and during that time, you said that your office, that the testing found layers of security simply missing. And then you seem to indicate that those results were expected. Is that true?
One of the things yes, the results were expected. The degree of the results, I think, were a bit surprising to us, but keep in mind that we've done covert testing over the years with very similar results to the ones that we did this year. And I would add that once we did the results this year, we discovered that TSA itself had done covert testing with very similar results. So everything had been consistently poor for a number of years, which, of course, was both exasperating and troubling to us.
Mr. Neffinger, given these results and these findings, what are your plans? What do you plan to do to address what's been called missing layers of security?
Well, first, it's a full system review. It started with understanding the nature of the failures that existed, to look at how those were similar to other discoveries in past years, and then, as I mentioned before, to really figure out what's the systemic reason for this. Because if you assume you have a generally talented workforce that really wants to do a good job, but they're failing, then it tells me that there's something else going on. And I do think we have a generally talented workforce that wants to do a good job, that wants to come to work to protect this nation on a daily basis. So there must be a reason that something for repeated failures of the same type system-wide. First of all, it's recognizing that it's a system that operates and not just a point failure at a given airport or a given number of airports. Second, it's looking back over the way in which what is your leadership of the organization, what are the environmental influences, and so on and so forth, and then beginning to reevaluate from core essential mission facts. What is it we are supposed to do? Do we understand our mission the way we should? So we're in the process of doing that right now.
And all that's good and fine, but what about specifics? Can you tell me something specifically, we changed this or we changed that?
Yes, sir. Proper use of the technology. So we dramatically changed the way people use that technology, because as it turns out, we hadn't taught them how important it was to use it properly. And without getting into classified details, and I'd be happy to provide those in a closed session, I could tell you specifically why some of those failures existed. So we fixed that. We actually told them how the equipment worked. That was something we'd never done before. We streamlined the number of procedures that we expected them to memorize. I mentioned there were 3,100 separate tasks and 88 different forms of pat-down. So that was just, it's impossible. There's no one who can do that. So we've now streamlined that down to about a 25-page quick response guide, which outlines in very specific detail with pictures, here's exactly what you do. And we've significantly improved our ability. So we train specifically to do things very differently at the checkpoint.
My time has expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Cartwright from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, TSA is a frontline counterterrorism organization, and its transportation security officers, those TSOs we've been talking about, they have to get it right every time. Mr. Neffinger, thank you for being here. I want to ask you, did TSOs receive annual performance review testing?
They do.
And do the TSOs typically know when they're going to be tested for their annual employee performance reviews?
Typically, yes.
Okay. And on average, how do they perform doing these annual performance review tests?
On average, they perform well.
But yet what we find out is that the covert tests conducted by the Inspector General, GAO, and your own internal teams revealed significant problems in screeners' performance. It seems as though TSOs kind of bring their A game when they know the test is coming, but not so much at other times. Inspector General Roth, nice to have you back in our committee room. Would you say covert tests of screeners' skills and knowledge bear out this concern I'm talking about?
Yes.
Now, according to TSA documents, of the 38 metrics used to assess the performance of field leadership at airport checkpoints, the majority have been focused on wait times for passengers rather than safety concerns. And I want to ask all of our witnesses, including you, Director Grover, would you agree that if TSA employees are told they're being judged, at least in part, on how expeditiously they move passengers through the system, this may signal to screeners that speed takes priority over other considerations?
Is that question for me? You're absolutely right, and I couldn't agree with you more. That's exactly what I found in the course of our analysis of the issue.
And I note that under TSA's new plan, it appears to put the focus back on security. Am I correct in that?
Yes, sir, you're correct.
Now, responding to the new safety before speed goals, one TSA employee was reported to be glad that, quote, the agency finally is going back to basics, emphasizing security over customer service and wait times, unquote. But another employee doubted the new plans will be implemented, and he or she thought that management will still be very focused on wait times and throughput. And I want to ask you, Mr. Neffinger, how will you convince frontline employees that the metric on which they will be evaluated will be security?
Well, I suppose, I mean, you have to get a little trust up front, and you teach them over time, but I will assure you that one of the first things I did was to eliminate wait time as a primary measurement. Now, it's not that wait time isn't important. It has its own, there's some issues associated with people packing up outside the sterile area, but it's effectiveness and security is the primary measure. And what I've said to not just my leadership team, but to everybody in the organization, and I've done it through direct contact, through video messages, through weekly messages from me, I've said, your number one job, if you're a screener, is to screen effectively. I will let management, it's management's responsibility to work with the airports and the airlines and others to do queue management. But we were putting that burden on the backs of the screeners. And it's no surprise to me that if you hold them accountable for moving people more effectively, more efficiently through the line, that they're going to do just that. You know, you get what you measure and you get what you emphasize. It's also no surprise that they do really well on the performance tests and do poorly in the other way, because that's about keeping your job. So it tells me that they're capable of doing the job well. We just have to give them we have to back them in that score 100%.
Well, all right, fine. Let me ask you this, Administrator Neffinger. When will performance assessments using the new metrics begin to be used? And will any aspects of the performance evaluation process change to track performance over time rather than performance on a single test? In other words, how are you going to ensure TSOs are at the top of their games every day, not just when their job performance reviews are happening?
Well, those performance metrics have already changed, and they've been explained and announced to the workforce.
All right, and now finally, let me ask you, how will you balance increased wait times with the focus on security and ensure that security considerations don't give way when balanced against increased wait times, particularly during busy travel periods like the upcoming holiday season?
Well, we are seeing an increase in wait times. I mean, it's spot significant, but two things. One, I really want to grow this trusted traveler population, and I want to do it in a smart way, which is a true vetted population. And so we're working very hard with both with the current vendor, who you may have seen some of the opportunities in the airports, and we're looking to expand it considerably through a request for proposal that's out, also working with the industry itself to look for opportunities to market it more effectively. And we are seeing a significant increase in enrollments. That's one way of doing it. The second is to provide surge staffing to those airports that we know are going to be under the greatest pressure during the upcoming travel season. But at the same time, not to put any of that burden on the backs of the screeners, but to move that into the management chain where it belongs.
All right, well, I'm out of time, and I yield back, Chairman Palmer.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes Mr. Heiss from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for being here with us today. In my short time in Congress, I have already seen and heard far too many reports, be it from the Office of Inspector General or GAO, wherever, dealing and detailing TSA's prohibitively expensive technology, either not working to properly screen passengers or the TSA agents not properly reading the technology one way or other in the various red team tests that have taken place. As you well know, Hartsfield, Jackson, Atlanta International Airport, hundreds of thousands of people every day flying out of there, one of, if not the most busiest airport in the world. I fly out of there myself almost every week. And I could not agree any more with my colleagues here today that the recommendations that have come from OIG and GAO is just vitally critical for these to be implemented. And you, Mr. Neffinger, just being in this position 4 months, hats off to you. I thank you for your comments here today and your willingness to admit the problems that you're facing and willingness to attack those head on. As some of the results have come back from some of the various tests, a word was used earlier describing those results as pathetic, and you yourself, I think, are fully aware of that. Another word that hit me earlier is the word culture that's been within TSA, and I believe Inspector Roth said that the culture is the most important issue that you saw that needs to change immediately. So that being said, what have you done to this point to transform the culture at TSA in such a way that the vulnerabilities are adequately addressed?
Well, Mr. Heiss, thank you for that question, and that is a key point. You know, as I looked at TSA, I tried to understand. So I come from an agency with 225 years of culture, the United States Coast Guard, and that's a lot of time to build an identity for an organization and a sense of who you are. TSA is still largely an amalgam of the cultures of the places that everybody came from. It really hasn't had time to grow a leadership core from within. And so you have this combination of people. So what do you do to jumpstart culture in an organization? I think there's a couple key things you can do, and it comes from both the top and the bottom. Let me start with the bottom. First, I think one of the greatest challenges TSA has amongst its workforce is that we train on the job across 75 different airports. So if you hire into TSA right now, if you hire into Atlanta, you actually just joined the Atlanta Hartsfield workforce. it's not clear to me that there's a real engagement with the broader sense of who you're part of. So one of the things I've proposed and I've asked for in this in the FY16 budget is to begin almost like a boot camp training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, so that I can conduct all new hire training there. That's one way to begin to engage from the bottom up this connection to a larger organization and a sense of culture, and to begin to enculturate people. At the top level, it takes somebody at the very top of the organization, and that's me right now, saying this is important. First of all, saying the word culture out loud and identifying where the culture isn't connected. And then identifying what you expect that culture to be. So I'm about to issue my administrator's intent, in which I very clearly, in a few succinct pages, outline what the culture of our organization is, and what I intend it to be, and how we intend to work towards that. And then you have to then begin working on that on a daily basis. So there's a series of efforts that I have planned over the coming months to begin to talk and train in the culture that you expect. I think that's the best way to begin to jumpstart it, and then it has to take root and grow over time. But it takes continuous attention. This is one of these things that will fade away if you don't pay attention to it.
Well, and it is a huge task, and in the middle of that, you have both the safety issue and the efficiency issue, trying to get passengers through. You mentioned some metrics a while ago that you are currently already implementing. Yeah. I want to know from Mr. Roth and Ms. Grover, do you believe those metrics are adequate to both provide safety and security that we need, and also efficiency?
I agree with the administrator that you get what you measure. So certainly if you measure the right things, you're going to get the right things. As part of our audit process, what we'll do is 90 days after the completion of our report, we're going to look back on it in sort of a rigorous, systematic way to determine whether or not these metrics are going to work. Until then, we're going to be skeptical about it, because that's our job, is to be skeptical. So we'll keep the Congress informed as we go forward.
Time will tell. Our biggest task for TSA at the moment would be to make sure they put in place a systematic, coherent approach to measuring the outcomes that they want to achieve, and then monitoring them and following up on them with the workforce, because that's the only way to make sure that they get improved, consistent effectiveness.
Well, again, thank each of you for your accountability and partnering together. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The Chair now recognizes Mr. DeShanier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Neffinger, let me just say how encouraging it is to hear your forthrightness, and also your comments about going to root cause and human factors. So when we look at human factors, I know when I talk to people in my district in the national laboratories, or I should say on the edges, who do studies on human factors in different environments and all their learning from neuroscience, one of the things that comes up is making sure that those individuals can focus on what their jobs are. And that also reinforces the things you say about culture, that you're trying to eliminate things that are distracting them. So for individuals who aren't getting paid a lot of money, but are dealing in a stressful retail environment where the customers aren't always always in the best mood, I wanted to ask you questions about your relationship with the airline industry. So it strikes me that having been a frequent traveler for many years, going through the experience, you don't go to TSA to find out what's the best way for you as a customer to go through wherever you're going, whether it's the general customers going through or pre-check. But if the more we continually reinforce, this is what you should expect, this is what you need to do. And then on the back end, your conversations with the airline industry, and specifically for charges for checked baggage, which you've mentioned. You stated that this trend and more checked baggages creates a stress screening environment at airport checkpoints. So both of those things, how do you deal with the airlines so that when some of the airlines start charging for checked baggage, and we have more and more people trying to carry on more, it seems to, just as an observer, create more stress for the screeners? And then secondarily, how do you help with the airlines so that when we're going to our apps to understand, for people who don't fly frequently, they are helping you reinforce how to get customers and educate customers how they can be best prepared to get through the line?
Well, thank you for that question. I think that, so I'm still relatively new in the game, but I spent a lot of time over the past 4 months meeting with both industry representatives, the associations that represent them, as well as the individual CEOs of each of the major U.S. airlines. I've been very encouraged with their openness and their response. They recognize some of these same challenges. I think that there's a great deal of work we can do to tie ourselves more closely together. There's nobody with a higher vested interest in security of the system than the people who are flying in the system. And I think that recognizing that, that gives you a lot of grounds for, we have the same objective in mind, even if we approach it from different motivations and different requirements. So I'm encouraged that a number of airlines and the travel associations that support them have begun to do more to advertise the trusted traveler programs like Global Entry and PreCheck. I think there's a lot we can do to simplify the application procedures and to make them more common across the various programs that the government offers. I think that you can never market that enough. But I do believe it really comes down to understanding that we're all in the same system together. We have different roles to play, but we can play those roles in a complementary fashion. The airlines have been working very hard to enforce the 1+1 rule, meaning the one carry-on bag, one handbag, or one briefcase. They're challenged as well. It's not my business to address their business models, but I can tell you it's just a fact that a lot more stuff is arriving. It's packed full of more things. People have electronics in there. All of that poses a challenge for the screeners to deal with, and they have to be very attentive to.
But you work with the airline industry so that you knew these changes were coming, or your predecessor knew that there had the potential to put more pressure on the screeners when they were going to start charging for check.
I mean, I think that would have been the expectation.
Do we have a mechanism to do that going forward?
Absolutely. I've asked and the airlines have promised to work closely together. I think both sides have to be aware of the impact of the decisions they make. And I'm as interested in the decisions and the business models of the airline industry and how it affects our business, because we support that business.
And also that they may be transferring costs that you might pick up that they would normally expect to be part of their costs.
At a minimum, to let them know what the consequence of that decision will be, that it may indeed lead to slower throughput at checkpoints, because we have to screen and clear these bags.
But in this instance, would there be some kind of analysis that they are making more money by charging for check bags, but it's costing us more money, either because it's putting more stress on the system, you're adding more people, they're working overtime, and do you have a relationship with the revenue stream that's going in there? Should they compensate you for that cost benefit that shows that there is?
Well, I have not looked at certainly I'd want to know what the impact is on me. If it requires me to have additional resources, then I need to be aware of it.
Thank you, Mr. Neffinger. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Russell from Oklahoma.
For being here today and your dedication to trying to help secure our republic. And Administrator Neffinger, thank you for your long and dedicated service to our republic. With regard to some of the issues on the screening partnership program, would you say that the partnerships have been better or worse performers than TSA, and what concerns do you have about that, if any?
In my initial look at the difference or the potential differences between private sector screeners and the public, we haven't seen any significant differences in performance, assuming that they're trained appropriately and the like. If I have any concerns at all, it's that we have a clear set of standards and expectations, and that those are consistently maintained across that program. But again, I don't see any evidence that there's any particular performance differences between the two.
Well, thank you. And with regard to the turnover, what percentage of new hires would you say turnover within 1 year or 2 years? Just ballpark.
You know, I just saw these numbers. I'll have to get you the exact number, but it's a fairly high turnover rate. Well, it depends. Part-time is different from full-time. So in the full-time workforce, it's about 10%, I think, is the number, and in the part-time workforce, it's been as high as about 25%.
And you had mentioned some of the reasons before, but obviously that's got to be a drain on your experienced longtime personnel, because they're constantly having to break in new employees. And you have the expense of the train-up, so these are really dollars that are lost. How will you mitigate that in the future?
Well, I think some of it goes back to that overarching discussion we had about connection to mission, connection to agency. I think, as I think about what is it that would make somebody decide that this is not for them, aside from the odd individual who just says that's just not what I thought I was signing up for, it's typically, did the thing I thought I was going to do, is that what the agency actually expects me to do? So am I connected to the mission? And am I connected to my agency? And do I see a future in the agency? Are there opportunities for training, further advancement? And so all of those are components of turnover. I think some of which can be addressed, beginning to be addressed by establishment of a common training program and an engagement, a sense of belonging to something larger than you. I think it continues with a clearly defined sense of progression in the organization and understanding of what your opportunities are, and incentivizing performance, understanding that if I perform well, I'll get rewarded for it, and a feeling of engagement with my leadership.
Thank you. What concerns do you have with cargo screening?
Well, cargo, as you know, has been a concern for some time. There have been a number of procedures put in place for that. I think that the question is a recognition of the fact that this is a much larger system than just a checkpoint. Even assuming you can get the checkpoint 100% right, there are many other potential vulnerabilities in the aviation environment, cargo being one of them. We have a very robust set of requirements for cargo on domestic aircraft as well as cargo that is coming inbound to the U.S. on foreign and domestic carriers coming from outside the U.S. And that reaches all the way back to the individuals who are actually packing the cargo container for shipment. It is an ongoing challenge, it's an ongoing threat, and it's one that you can't take your eyes off at any point.
I guess on the TSA pre-program, a lot of issues have been addressed with that. I mean, I understand the benefits of certainly having low-risk travelers set aside for expedited screening. And you made it a point to, in your testimony here today, to try to stop the managed inclusion where people are benefiting from the program but really have no vetting whatsoever. Based upon the needs and the shortfalls of the pre-program, how much of that was from managed inclusion vice vetted passengers?
Are you speaking with respect to the covert
pre-program,
the covert testing failures, or?
Yes.
Well, I think that it is the case that some of the, without getting into details, that as Inspector General Roth noted, some of the people who were coming through the system were diverted into it, and that may have contributed to some of the failures that we saw. I felt that the managed inclusion, as I said before, injected unacceptable risk into the system. I didn't know anything about these individuals, and I thought that they were best put back into standard screening until such time that they presented themselves in a direct way for vetting to come into the program.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
The Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Lujan Gresham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all very much for your testimony today. Mr. Neffenger, I'm a big supporter and proponent of evaluative testing and review of large employee organizations, because it can be very difficult, and particularly when it's so broad-based and it's a national organization, to really get at the heart of what is occurring on a day-to-day basis. And in my own state, created undercover or anonymous care evaluations of long-term care facilities. I think today it's still the only state authorized or I think the authority exists, but we have a statute that reconfirms that not only does the authority exist, but it should be encouraged, and you should undertake these anonymous care evaluations. And I appreciate very much that your leadership recognized that this might be a way to either confirm the data that you have, which at the time suggested that things were operating fairly well, and you might have some complaints or an anomaly, or you would have the opposite, right, which is exactly what occurred here, is that you've identified that you've got significant issues, and in the course of your responses to questions, and certainly in your testimony, you've, and I appreciate that, have accepted that there is a culture problem in the organization that needs to be addressed, and you've got a 10-point plan. And so I'm really interested in even implementing that plan. It is very difficult. It's challenging to create in large organizations, I think, a kind of top to bottom, bottom to top culture shift, because I think too often people believe that it's a temporary investment and then it's easier to kind of go back to the way that it was, particularly if you're doing random efforts at looking at one region or one area or one airport or one screening system versus another. It really depends on the leadership in that particular organization. What have you learned from this experience that, we can help you with in terms of really having a sustainable culture change shift with the leadership and rank-and-file employees? And what can we take from that and use it for other government entities that we have the same issues? Secret Service, the Veterans Administration, several others in federal government that I think could really use this kind of approach.
Well, thank you. There's a lot in that question, and I think it's really important, and you've hit on a number of the key concerns and thoughts that I've had with respect to this. You're absolutely right that it's challenging to do cultural change, but we have one great benefit. We have a really, really important mission, and it's a very defined and very specific mission. And so that's a huge rallying point to begin cultural change, unlike an organization that might have, you know, a couple hundred different things to do. So I like that, and it's a mission that people care passionately about, and you can tie them to it. And I never forget that everybody in this workforce raised their hand and took an oath of office, and you can activate that. So that's one great advantage that you have, but it's not enough. And it's not enough for me to say I want cultural change, because no one individual makes it happen. But it is important for me to say it, because it has to start at the very top of the organization. The organization that raised their hand and took the oath has to believe that the person leading that organization took the same oath and cares about it. And so you have to say that out loud. And then you have to build some institutional structures that actually support it. I mentioned a couple today. I think it's critical that I begin to do new hire training in a consistent, standardized, singular way. And I think that will do great value in building culture over time. It's not immediate, but as you do that.
I agree with that, but then I hope you're going to, and I think that's a great idea, but that the accountability balance with incentivizing and creating long-term shifts, having an immediate shift that people believe is really taking place is the harder part, I think, and I'm really interested to hear more about that.
Well, so the other thing I did is and apparently for the first time ever, I brought the entire, what I termed the leadership of is both the senior leaders at the headquarters office here in the D.C. area, as well as all of the federal security directors, the regional directors, and then my regional directors who are posted in overseas locations together. That was about 175 people. So first time in the history of TSA we'd done that. I spent 2 days with them, and it was 2 days of connect. 2 days. We talked about how we collectively define the culture of the organization. That I can say.
I'm out of time. I applaud your efforts, and I would, with the Chair's discretion, just encourage you, balance accountability with incentivizing and creating a clear operating system, because I don't believe it's sustainable unless you do. Thank you very much for your leadership. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Recognize Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had a lot of discussion about equipment and technology, and we've gotten into the personnel issue as well. The Inspector General has stated that the TSA's problems come, I think, largely from a lack of training. Mr. Roth, is that correct?
That is certainly one aspect of it.
Mr. Neffinger, how do you plan to address the training issues?
Well, we did immediate address of the current results, and we did what we called Mission Essentials training. It was an 8-hour block of training across the entire workforce, and it started with the frontline workforce. We did this over the course of August and September. We trained every single screener, and now we're in the process of doing the same for the leadership of the organization. And that was designed specifically to talk about what were the nature of the failures, and then to talk about systemically why those failures existed and how they existed across the organization. Now, we have to go back and measure the effectiveness of that training, and we're in the process of doing that now, and we'll do that going forward. That is a program that we're putting into place on a routine basis now. We're going to do quarterly mission essentials training, and then we're looking at, across the organization at all levels, what are the progressive levels of developmental training and repeated training that has to be done to ensure that you identify problems before they become systemic, before you get into massive failures like we saw earlier. I think that time will tell as to how effective it is, but I'm encouraged that some initial anecdotal results show that significantly improved performance in those areas where we've recently tested.
Now, are you referencing the use of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center? Is this your training for frontline people?
It's one aspect of that training. We used it to bring all of our trainers in during the month of July to train them and then push them out to on-the-job training for our workforce. What I'd like to do at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center is really move our new hire academy full-time to there beginning in 2016, and then develop additional training opportunities and developmental training throughout someone's career in the TSA.
Mr. Roth and Ms. Grover, you both can respond to this, but do you believe this basic training will help? Is it going to get us where we need to be?
It absolutely will help, both in the sense of mission and community that Administrator Neffinger referenced, but also some of the very basics that we found weren't being followed with regard to checkpoint operations. So I'm a firm believer in training, and that is one of our recommendations, so we're gratified that Administrator Neffinger is following through on that.
And I agree, it is necessary and critical to both the development of an appropriate culture and enhancing knowledge to support security effectiveness, but it is not sufficient. Administrator Neffinger mentioned the plan to follow up to make sure the training itself was getting the desired results, and that is critical.
Mr. Russell of Oklahoma asked a question about cargo security. I want to ask about checked bags. Mr. Neffinger, are you aware of the leak that occurred earlier this year where all of the Travel Sentry luggage keys, which TSA uses, have been released to the public?
I think you're referring to the photograph of a key that was published in a major newspaper.
Right. That apparently they can reproduce those keys. Are you aware of that?
I am, yes, sir.
Can you provide the committee with any memorandum of understanding between your agency and the Travel Sentry regarding the Master Key Program? Could you do that for us?
I'll see if we have one, yes, sir.
All right. And then my last question will be, how do you plan, or will you be able to address this issue of baggage locks if the Travel Sentry keys have been compromised?
Well, I think that the first thing I would say is that it's clearly a compromise for potential for locking that bag outside the aviation. Bags are still secure to go through the system because they go through screening into the aviation. So I don't see it as a threat to the aviation security system, but it's clearly a potential theft issue outside of the aviation environment. I think I need to see what the potential solution is from the Travel Sentry folks, and then look to see what we can institute in the future. But clearly, we have to address that as a problem.
That's the context of my question. You have travelers who are not using locks because you use bolt cutters, and they want to know that their luggage is secure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank the gentleman, Mr. Grossman, gentleman from Wisconsin.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming over here. I know it's a tough job. You know, it's got to be a difficult thing to work. I assume you can work there for 30 years and never catch somebody who has ill intent. So you must sometimes wonder what you're doing is worthwhile. And you're also dealing with a public that usually does not consider this a wonderful thing. So you're dealing with people who aren't particularly happy to have you there. First question I have in general, say in the last 5 years, have you folks caught anybody who you believe, not somebody accidentally was slipping in a fingernail clipper or something, but somebody who really had bad intent in the last 6 or 7 years that you feel?
Within the entire system, I would say yes. And remember that there's a security environment in which you enter when you first put your name into a reservation system. So I would say we have repeatedly identified people with connections to known or suspected terrorists over the years.
I mean, people who you believe at the airport, when I go through these things, if you guys didn't stop them, they were going to try to do a bad thing. Not somebody who was one of thousands of people on a terrorist watch list. I mean, somebody who you believe that if you were not there, they would have done bad things.
I believe we've had a few instances that I've been aware of. I hope that the vast majority are deterred from trying in the first place.
Right. That's the goal. Right. You can maybe forward to the committee later the examples where you really feel
Yes,
that
sir.
you caught somebody who would have done a horrible thing if you hadn't caught them. Second question, we had a hearing a while ago on this stuff, and at least what I took out of it is that, you know, maybe dogs would be a better way to go about this, and there were slip-ups. Have you done any work with dogs or used them as a trial?
We do actually. We have quite a few K-9 teams deployed throughout the aviation system. I noted in an earlier question that I'm in the process of moving some of those teams from what I consider to be smaller, lower-risk airports to the large airports. I don't know I think the exact number is somewhere around 112 teams currently. We've got another dozen or so teams coming on this coming year. I think dogs are a very important additional element of security in the system. They provide a lot of capability, both for cargo screening as well as for passenger screening. So I'm a big proponent of the use of K-9 teams.
Can you see the day when we use more dogs and less people? I mean,
you know, I don't know that the dogs will ever replace the people component.
not entirely, but I mean,
But I think that I can see a day for using more dogs, and we're doing that as we go forward.
would they replace some people? I mean, can you see the day where, you know, rather than I go through there and I see 8 uniformed people, I see 2 uniformed people and a dog. Do you see that day?
Well, I think there's a potential, but that really speaks to the larger question of how that checkpoint evolves over time. What I do see is a day when the checkpoint looks very different from what it does today. We're still largely dealing with the exception of the AIT machine, largely dealing with the same kind of checkpoint we've had for the past decade or more. And I think we're on the cusp of a very different-looking checkpoint experience in the next 5 years.
Okay. A while back, I know a guy who worked for you, and he felt it was a very top-heavy organization, or at least at the airport this guy worked at. Are you doing things over time to reduce the number of administrative staff as opposed to people doing the work?
We have. We've come down about a total of 6,000 people in TSA since the spring of 2013. So in the past 2 years, almost now 3 years almost, we've reduced the workforce by about 13%. I think we'll continue to do so. I've asked to hold steady for the coming year as we look at the impact of the elimination of managed inclusion, and I look to correct what I see to be the systemic issues in the organization. And then we'll revisit the staffing standards following this year. But I do see that there are more efficiencies to be gained always in an organization. I think you have to look at that continuously.
Okay. What do you pay your people starting? I mean, one of the guys that I see, or gals I see, what is the compensation they get?
It varies by location because there's locality pay associated with it, but it's roughly equivalent to the incoming level for a.
How much is it?
You know, I think it runs somewhere around $28,000 to $30,000, but I'll get you the exact figure.
Did you have a hard time finding people or not?
I think we're challenged like any organization to find a workforce. We've met our recruiting goals every year, but the turnover is higher than I'd like to see it be.
Is there any reason why somebody 60 to 65 couldn't do that job, or you discriminate against them, or you'll get?
Oh, not at all. In fact, we have quite a few people who are retirees that are working in the screener workforce.
Okay, I guess I'm out of time. We'll give you one more question. Sure, I ran into a guy this weekend who was on your whatever list, the trouble list, okay, and he'd been on it for quite a long period of time. He wasn't as mad about it as I would be. I mean, one time he walked through the thing, and apparently the people all ducked down, and they called the police on him, and, you know, people came in with their guns drawn. He was somebody, if you just looked at the guy, you'd think, what? I mean, some guy who lives in a little town in Wisconsin. It was like, really? How quickly does it take people to get off this list? I mean, when you guys make a mistake like this, how quickly should it be?
Well, there's a redress process that we partly manage. It's managed also by others in the law enforcement intelligence community. What I would say is I'm not familiar with that specific. If I can get the specifics on that, we can look at that specific case. But there is a process for if you think that you have been inaccurately placed on a list, there's a redress process, and it's a pretty fast redress process, as I understand it. Although it's a process that you have to go through.
Long time for this guy, but I'll.
I'd certainly take it for action if you've got the details for me.
Okay, thanks much.
Yeah.
Thank the gentleman. Ms. Maloney.
Thank the gentleman for calling this hearing. TSA relies on many different pieces of equipment to carry out its screening tasks. For example, it uses advanced imaging technology machines, walk-through metal detectors, explosive trace detection machines, bottled liquid scanners, and X-ray machines, among other pieces of equipment. In May of this year, the IG's office issued a report that concluded TSA is not properly managing the maintenance of its airport screening equipment. And one of the IG's key findings was that TSA relies on self-reported data provided by the maintenance contractors and does not validate the data to confirm that required preventive maintenance actions has been taken. TSA also does not validate the corrective maintenance data reported by its contractors. So my question is to Inspector General Roth. If TSA has not been validating the data reported by its contractors, can it be sure that all required maintenance has been performed and that its machines are operating correctly?
No, they can't, and you accurately summarized what those reports are. It's the functional equivalent of giving your car to the mechanic but not checking to see whether or not they've changed the spark plugs.
Yeah, well, that's important. And IG Roth, do any of the contractors responsible for the maintenance of TSA equipment have sole source contracts? Is it competitively bid or is it a sole source contract?
My understanding is competitively bid, but I think I'd need to get back to you to give you a full and
Can you get back to me and the chairman, would you please,
Absolutely.
and the ranking member? IG Roth, have any contractors ever been penalized for failing to perform any type of maintenance tasks?
I'm not aware of any, but again, let me take that back and be sure of the answer.
And what recommendations did your office make to TSA to improve maintenance of its equipment, and what is the status of these recommendations?
We did make a number of recommendations with regard to the process that TSA uses to verify this maintenance. That is still in process. We typically allow them some time to be able to institute those changes, but again, I will get back to you with the specifics on that.
And I'd like to ask Administrator Neffinger, are you confident that TSA now has the systems in place to hold its contractors accountable for providing proper maintenance of its equipment? And are you confident TSA's equipment is being maintained and repaired properly?
Thanks for that question. Let me first say that I concur completely with the Inspector General's findings, and I did find that we had, not that the maintenance wasn't being done, but we had no way to verify that it was in fact appropriate and done. So we put the processes in place to do so. We now have to measure whether those processes are adequate to do that. But I'm confident that that certainly I get it, and that the person I have tasked as responsible for ensuring that it happens understands the importance of having an auditable follow-up trail to everything that's done to ensure that this equipment is maintained to its standards.
Well, I just must underscore, which I know you feel, the responsibility that you have to the American people. We know that there are many who want to harm our citizens and that they try to do it for some reason through the airplanes, and they are continuing to break our system because I check with the airlines in my area, and they have incidents where they're trying to break through. So having the oversight and the audit and making sure that this is happening is critically important. And I look forward to you getting back to the committee, Inspector General Roth, on the answers that you needed to review more for us. I think they're important questions, and I look forward to seeing what your response is. Again, I thank you for your public service. Thank you for being here today, and I thank the chairman for calling the hearing on a very important safety issue. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady, and I'll finish with a round of summary questions here. First of all, Mr. Administrator, in previous response to me, we discussed who poses a risk, and it's less than 1% of the travelers that are examined of the 660 million. Is that still your position?
Yeah, I couldn't put an exact number on it, but I would agree with you that
Gotta
the vast
be far
majority,
less than one.
the vast majority of travelers
You're
are safe to
probably
travel.
dealing with 20 to 50,000 people on some sort of a watch list or no-fly list that we're looking to not board, who may pose a risk. But we're spending about 95% of our resources, again, on folks who pose no risk. You talked about where you're going, and I saw some of your report, and I was pleased to see that you're looking to the future. Here's my boarding pass. I've been to Europe last in Italy and once in Germany. There was no TSA-type screener at the entry point. I have pictures of it. I'd be glad to show you. You go up and you put your boarding pass on, and the style lets you through. If it doesn't let you through, there is a person who would subject you to additional screening. That's almost commonplace now in Europe in the domestic arena. Maybe you saw that when you were there?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah. We have people going through this. Some of the dumbest things I've ever seen. Where's your cell phone? Let me borrow your cell phone a second. They go up and put your cell phone down, and they let you through. But then you've got another TSA. If you don't have it on your electronic device, then you have someone who takes time, and they go through and circle each thing. I mean, they're just things like that, and where we are not. Can you name any countries other than Bulgaria, Romania, or Poland, sort of in the more sophisticated countries, that have all federal screening?
I'll get back to you. I know that most European countries do private screening.
Israel, yeah, but it's under federal supervision. Right. I have never said do away with TSA. I have said change your role, change the resources to connecting the dots to security. That's what's going to get us. And every time we've been successful in stopping someone, it's connecting the dots. But again, you said it may be 5 years before we could get to this. This should be tomorrow.
Well, actually, I think we'll get to that much faster.
Yeah, and we should be embedding the information here. I saw that in German, Nuremberg demonstrated in 2003. Completely people, they won't be able to board. The systems exist. We just keep falling further behind adding. Now you're saying you're training them, you're sending them back to basics, to a law enforcement training program?
No, it's at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. It's not a law enforcement training program. We're just using
well,
the
we have to make
there.
it clear, and some of my colleagues don't even know that TSA screeners are not sworn personnel, right?
That's correct. This is not.
They are not sworn personnel.
Right.
They are screeners.
That's correct.
And again, you have this huge bureaucracy trying to recruit, and maybe if you've gotten better, you know, I disclosed we're hiring them off of pizza box ads and above discount gas pump advertisements for screeners. That hopefully has stopped. But you can recruit all you want. You can train all you want. You've actually trained more people than you employ. At this time, you know that? You've actually trained more people. They're gone. Your turnover has been, some places it's horrendous, other places, and granted, some markets are very difficult. But, okay, so we've got equipment, and this is about equipment. I've heard the AIT failures to maintain, to operate, to train people for it, advanced imaging technology. The deployment is a disaster. How many machines do we have? 701?
About 750 machines currently.
750 machines. They're at how many airports? 160 is the answer. How many airports do you have? say over 400?
About 400, about 400.
So there are about 300, 290 airports that don't even have an AIT machine. I'm Mr. Dumb Terrorist, okay? Where am I going to go? Enter the system. AIT is the best equipment we have, but it can be thwarted. I know it can be thwarted. I helped get it in the airport, but it's the best device we have available. You've made some refinements to it, but personnel are human beings. They're going to fail. I will bet the staff $1. Okay. Mike, I'm going to bet you $1. They'll be back here. We'll do it next September. We'll do the same here. We'll have covert testing. Maybe you'll improve slightly, but it'll still be a disaster. It's been a disaster in every classified hearing I've sat in that would scream for some change. So again, I want to get you out of the personnel business, which is that huge, again, they're not law enforcement, but screening team. Again, you need to be in intelligence and connecting the dots and security, setting the protocols, the standards, seeing who is not performing, getting rid of them if it's a private firm that's operating. Okay, so here's our AITs. We have 450 airports. We're at 160 locations. Then you go to the locations when they put them out. It was mind-boggling. And how are you going to change that? It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars for the equipment, then it costs the airports and you a fortune to put them in place. You go to some concourses and they got 2 or 3 of them in one concourse. It was never intended for that. It's intended to be a secondary screening device. And then in other concourses, even at the National, you go to one of our airports and some of the concourses have none. So you have started, I mean, God bless you, you're trying to change a mess. But even the deployment of that important machine has been a disaster. When we spoke, I asked you about reducing some of the overhead. You've got thousands of people in overhead, 46,000 screener. It was up to 15,000 we found either within the 46 or here in Washington. One time there were 4,000 making $103,000 on average just within 20 miles of where we're sitting. And some of those may be important responsibilities. But again, paring that down. We have the public-private screening partnership. And I'm a firm believer in that. They probably, well, I know they perform a little bit better than you because I've had that tested. And they came back and told me, you know what the response was when there was a fair, open tested? They said that private screening performs under federal supervision. Private screening under federal supervision performs statistically significantly better. Now, I don't care how polite your agents are. It's nice to have them polite. You've impressed some of the members. What I care is if they are able to deter a terrorist from getting through. And they are not law enforcement personnel. They are screening personnel. You've got your whole billions of dollars focused on people who don't pose a risk. So we need to get away from that model. A member of Congress, Mr. Walberg, who testified, he's got an ID card. Sometimes they don't even recognize a federal ID, ask it for a driver's license. But I've had hearings here on driver's license and IDs, TWIC cards and others that can and have been duplicated. That's one of the easiest things you can do. And I can take and make you the fanciest boarding pass. I'll challenge you. Be glad to go out and take one, and I can get through any of your gates at National or any place else with just a little bit of work on a computer. So again, we've set up a system that is destined to fail. You'll be back here. Maybe slight improvement, training some more folks, maybe a little bit better retention. Back to the partnerships. In Rochester, one of several dozen public-private partnerships, I told you they had at one time 15 to 18 people, most of them making between $60 and $100 and some thousand dollars. They have 1.1 million passengers. I went to Canada, looked at similar operations. They have one federal person And I think you need a federal person, someone who's charged with the intelligence, someone who's charged with conducting the oversight audit on a daily basis and making certain it works. Is there any hope of getting a reduction of some of the people we don't need at these programs where we have the public-private partnership?
As you know, we actually have reduced the number of oversight directly for the partnership, but there's the additional responsibilities TSA has. Remember, there's a surface inspection and transportation, so a number of those people are involved in compliance examinations and the surface examinations.
And there's anything that can't be done through the contract?
Well, as you know,
inclusion in a contract? But okay, 2, 3, 4 people at an airport like Rochester, not 15 or 16, again, and I know the game. You pack it so it makes it look like it costs more or as much for private screening under federal supervision. We're going to have a report that will be released soon and show some of the costs. At least it costs less under that. Not that I'm trying to do it on the cheap. They're just more efficient. I support federal wages, no change in that. I support union membership. I put that in the bill, in the beginning bill. In fact, in the private screening in San Francisco, they had folks belonging to unions long before the most recent sign-up of folks across the area. I have another question the chairman wants me to get in. Will you let the committee know today, or within the period we keep the record open, we want a complete response on when you will finish and address all of the recommendations that the IG and GAO have put forward. Could you give us that today, do you think, or do you want to give it to us for the record?
I'll give you a schedule for the record. What I will tell you is what I told both the Inspector General and Director Grover, and that is that I'm committed to addressing all the remaining open recommendations, as well as any that remain that are non-concurs, and getting those closed.
And if you can give the committee in the next, what are you going to leave this open, 10 days, Mr.? Yeah, 10 days without objection, so we'll leave it open for 10 days? No, I'm not finished. That was just leaving it open and making certain they comply with your wishes, too. Okay. But in any event, 10 days, and we would like that made part of the official record and as exact a date, because again, I'm going to hold a subcommittee hearing if we don't hold a full one within a year, give you a chance. You're here, and I love your attitude. I love your willingness to be open with a committee. You've inherited one of the most difficult tasks. You're the, what, 6th administrator. I've dealt with them all, and I think you're one of the most capable that we've been fortunate to have. But we need to look at rewriting the ship on this whole security thing, get you out of the business that gives you the headaches. And I know you'll go back and people say, oh, Micah's full of it, and don't listen to him. But as long as you keep trying to manage a $46,000 HR department, you are going to have problems with recruiting, with training, with retaining, with managing. You will never get it right, I can assure you. Not that it's your fault, you're dealing with human beings. And then using all of that resource to go after 99% of the people who don't pose a risk, not expediting their passage and not redirecting those resources towards the bad guys, connecting the dots, security, making certain that you set the standards. And then, as the Inspector General and Director Grover have said, that you bear down on those that are not meeting the standards that you have. You kick their butts out, you fire them, you terminate their contract. That's your, I believe, your role. So, again, welcome. Isn't this great? You want to reconsider? No, but you are a true hero to come forward. I have the greatest respect for you and what you're going to try to do. I'm trying to get you to see a year from now what you're going to face when you come back here, and where we'll be. With that, thank you, and I want to yield to the Ranking Member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for your patience. I know it has already been a long morning, and I only have a few questions. As all of you know, our nation has one standard credential for merchant mariners and employees who need access to secure areas of ports. It is called the Transportation Work Identification Card, or TWIC card. Use of the TWIC was required by the Maritime Transportation Security Act, and each TWIC is issued by the TSA. Administrator Neffinger, I'm curious, given your background with the Coast Guard, which model do you think is better? Should credentials for access to facilities, secure areas be issued by each individual facility, or should they be issued by a national entity like TSA?
I don't know if I have a good direct answer to that, and by that I mean this. You know, when you have a national issued ID card, that creates a lot of challenge in managing it and issuing it, and introduces some concerns with respect to viability across a large organization. That said, I think that both systems can work effectively if the oversight is what it should be. I think as I look at the badging environment, the airports would argue that they like the fact that the badges are different because it means you can't move from one airport to another and show up and get access. You have to have something that says your airport on it. I think that we can do a lot more to ensure the security of those badges and to ensure the accountability of those badges as we move forward. There was an awful lot of information that came out of what the committee study told us about the way to manage and to ensure the integrity of those badges going forward, as well as to look at the oversight of those. I think the Inspector General has pointed out some important areas for us to consider. So I don't really know which approach is better. I think both approaches can work very effectively, but they need a lot of oversight no matter which way you take it. As you know, there have been some challenges in the TWIC program as well.
Yeah. Are you confident that full implementation of your plans will ensure that TSA's screening systems will pass future covert tests by the Inspector General and TSA's own covert testing teams?
Well, testing will tell, but I'm confident that we're on the right track. I hope it means that we will see dramatic improvement in the future. I believe it will, but I don't believe that we can just declare it done and move forward. I think that this is a continuous process and it's a continuous attention. This is one of these things that, as I said before, you can't just fix this and assume you've got it right. This is what it's allowed us to do is see that this is an ongoing attention that needs throughout the entire life of the organization. There is no fixing it. There is addressing the challenges, learning from what you've addressed, testing yourself, learning from those testing, and that continuous improvement as we go forward. So what I will tell you is that certainly for the duration of my tenure, that I will never take my focus off continuing to test this system, evaluating the processes and training that we put in place, the procedures, continuing to adjust them as we discover whether they work or don't work, and then looking for how to distribute the best practices that we find across the whole system. And that includes looking to our international partners for anything that they might be doing that can inform the way we do business, because this global system relies on global standards and global consistency.
Now, as you heard GAO state today, TSA has not always established performance measures that clearly are aligned with its goals. How will you know if you have altered the pervasive cultural problems in TSA, and what performance metrics will confirm it?
Well, I took a look at the entire measurement system, and essentially said, look, the current way we're measuring isn't leading us to improving the system. So I said, there's a readiness component. I want to know if the workforce is ready, meaning are they trained? Do they know what the mission is? Do they have the support of the leadership? And is there ongoing attention to that? And then I want to look at their performance. Then I have to test them. Did all that stuff work? Did what I think about their readiness actually show itself in their performance? The system has to have the same sort of measures. You need to know, is the system ready? Meaning, have we maintained it appropriately? Can we verify that we've maintained it appropriately? Is it meeting the standards before we deploy it that we expect it to meet? And all those other things that go into, does it work? And then the second piece is, how well does it perform when you plug it into the system? And so then you have to go back and you test that as well. So you're testing the people, the processes, and the technology, both its readiness to do its mission as well as the actual production of that mission. And it's a continuous process. I will tell you that right now I get a report on a weekly basis directly to me on those measures. We have a ways to go yet. We're getting the organization used to a new way of thinking. It's measuring effectiveness. It's focusing on the security component and the effectiveness of that. It's defining that mission in a very clear way. And then looking to see what we're learning as we're studying it. So we've actually learned quite a bit already about system readiness, both in the workforce as well as in the technology, and it's leading to some things that we have to do to improve that on both scores. And it's also beginning to point the way towards how we're going to effectively measure performance. And that will include working with the Inspector General and the GAO as we go forward. I see this as a very valuable partnership, even recognizing that they have to be independent and they're skeptical, and I want them to stay that way, but they give me valuable information about how my system is working.
Well, let me say this, that one of the things that I pushed with the Coast Guard, with the Secret Service and the Baltimore City Police, is I've said that I want them to create an organization which is the elite of the elite. In other words, a feeling that we are the best and that our standards are high. And I believe that when you get there, the people who are caught up in a culture of mediocrity will fall off because they won't feel that they belong, period. You won't have to fire them. They'll leave. Some of them you may have to fire, but most of them will just back off. So, you know, as I've heard the testimony today, one of the things that it just gnaws at me is the idea that we have now an agency that's willing to accept their recommendations. And Director Grover, I keep going back to some of the things you said about accepting the recommendations and then trying to do them. But we're still having those gaps. And, you know, as I was sitting here and I was listening to all of this, I was saying to myself, well, maybe it's not just all the things that you just said, but you have to add something else to it. See, I think that when we have recommendations and then your agency looks at them and says, oh, yeah, we got to do this. Yeah, we missed that. We got to do that. It may go back to that whole idea of trying to impress or get it done, but not concentrating on why we're doing it. You know, why that's important. And some kind of way, I think, to get to the elite of the elite, I think people have to have a full understanding of why it is and the fact that bad things can happen, and perhaps if you're not on guard, they will. And for some reason, I keep going back to Katrina. I'm telling you, I think about Katrina almost every day because it was one of those situations, Director Grover, where we claimed that we were ready. We couldn't even communicate across town. And like I said, when they said the rubber meets the road, we didn't have a road. And our country is so much better than that. And so I think one thing is leadership. I think another is metrics. And I'm hoping that I'll talk to Chairman Chaffetz, and he's been very open to accepting the model that we used in the Coast Guard Subcommittee, where we constantly brought folks back so that we could actually, you know, see where we were going. Because one of the things, as you've heard me say many times, a lot of times agencies, and I'm not saying you did this, but agencies will wait out a Congress. And then, you know, so there's no real accountability. Going back to what you said, Ms. Grover, Director Grover, you got to have accountability. One of the best ways to have accountability is set deadlines and then come back and report. And it may be that you don't achieve every single thing you want to achieve. But hopefully we can get in, you know, see our progress. And by the way, I think when the agency sees its progress, that, again, helps them feel like the elite among the elite. And finally, you know, I thank all of you for working together. and I thank you for having the attitude that you have. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make is sometimes we act like, you know, the Inspector General and Director Rover, that we're on different teams. But what you're saying is that we're all on the same team, trying to lift up the American people and keep them safe. That's the team that we're on. That's our team. And so if I've got a member of the team that can see things that I can't see and can bring them to my attention and help me become better and, again, become the elite of the elite, I think that's what we ought to be about. And I thank you for having that kind of attitude, because that's what's going to get us where we've got to go. And I think that and I go back to what Mr. Gowdy said a little bit earlier, I'm going to tell you, I have had nothing but good experiences with TSA. I mean, everywhere I go. And I know that we've got some great men and women working for that organization. But at the same time, I know that they're human. And so I think we have to constantly find those ways to keep the work exciting, to keep it, you know, refreshing their skills and reminding them of how important their job is and how we appreciate them. Because I can tell you, when you got somebody, you got hundreds of people every day trying to rush to get to a flight. Some of them are very upset. They got the kids, got the stroller, I mean, and all this, and then they've got to be checked. I'm sure that's just an opportunity for people's frustrations to get out of hand. But yet and still, I've seen over and over again where TSA officers have just been very patient, understanding, and tried to do the right thing at all times and at the same time protect us. And so, again, I thank you all. We look forward to seeing you again. Your testimony has been extremely meaningful, and I think it can lead us into effectiveness and efficiency. I've often said that there's nothing like having motion, commotion, and emotion and no results. We have to have results, and I think we can get there. And I think you all have given us a roadmap to get there. Thank you.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I thank the members for participating today. We've gone through all the membership, and you all have been most accommodating. Realize the task that you have, Administrator. But I particularly want to thank the Inspector General and also the Director. You have an important role with your oversight. The committee conducts some oversight, rely on you and your independence and going forward. And the goal here is to keep the American public safe, to make certain that we don't have another 9/11, and that we do the best we can with the resources given to us by the taxpayers. So with that being said, there being no further business before the committee, I will mention too, the staff has said that we will be submitting to you all as witnesses additional questions in this interim time for response. So we want you to know those responses will also be made part of the record. There being no further business, this hearing of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee is adjourned. Thank you.